She's just a little girl, Jack said, his voice dropping low enough that only the rain could hear him. She's been in that car for hours, alone, in the dark. Please tell me, what kind of world does that to a child? Be answered, nobody could. If you've ever believed that the most dangerous-looking person in the room might also be the only one willing to do the right thing, this story is for you. We invite you to subscribe to our channel and follow this story all the way to the end. And drop a comment telling us what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. It had been building for 2 hours before it finally broke. On Jack's count felt it coming in his shoulders. First, that particular tightening that always arrived before a bad sky opened up and he'd pushed harder on the throttle, trying to outrun it the way he'd outrun most things in his life. Gee, he didn't outrun this one. He hit the stretch of Route 9 that twisted through the Pine Barrens east of Millhaven. The rain was coming down in sheets, kind of rain that didn't just wet you, but found its way through everything, through leather and cotton and skin, until it felt like the cold was coming from inside rather than outside. He wasn't complaining. He'd ridden through worse. Jax Callahan had been riding through worse his entire adult life. 34 years old, built like something that had been assembled from spare parts and stubborn decisions. His hands on the grips were wide and scarred, the knuckles thickened from decades of work and weather, and a few things he didn't talk about in polite company. His face carried the kind of lines that came not from laziness, but from living hard outdoors, from wind and sun and cold, and the particular strain of being responsible for other people when other people would rather not be responsible for anyone. His beard's dark, with threads of silver running through it now. His eyes, picks when people bother to look at them, the color of a winter lake gray blue, and still and deeper than you'd expect. The vest on his back said Hell's Angels across the shoulder, blades and letters that most people saw from 3 car lengths away and immediately found somewhere else to look. The rocker, the patch read Millhaven, and below that, close enough, and not running in the opposite direction, you'd see a smaller patch that said Road Captain. And underneath all of it, if you somehow had access to the accounting records that Jax kept in a spiral notebook in the locked drawer of his desk at the clubhouse, see 12 years of hospital bills paid anonymously, teen roof repairs for families who'd called the city and been told to wait, the 3 Thanksgivings funded for households, where the choice had been between groceries and heating, and one particular entry years ago, November, that simply read, kids, school supplies, coats, bus passes do not follow up. They need to know where it came from. Nobody knew about the notebook. That was the point. What people knew about Jax Callahan was the vest and the motorcycle and the reputation, and most of them had decided that was enough. Tonight, he'd been coming back from Clarkson County, 60 miles east, where the chapter had spent the weekend doing what they called a welfare run, checking in on elderly residents who lived alone along the rural routes, whose families had drifted away or never existed in the first place. People who might go a week without seeing another human face if nobody thought to stop. They'd done this run every October for 8 years. They'd found 3 people this year who needed medical attention, 2 who needed groceries, 91-year-old woman named Hetty Marks who had needed nothing except for someone to sit at her kitchen table and drink bad coffee and listen to her talk about her late husband for 2 hours. Jax had been the one who stayed for the coffee. He always stayed for the coffee. Had headed back to Millhaven in the afternoon. Dax stayed until Hetty's neighbor promised to look in on her tomorrow, and then he'd shaken the old woman's hand. She'd insisted on a handshake. Hugs were for people who'd earned it, and she didn't know him well enough yet, which had made him laugh for the first time in 3 days. And then he'd climbed back on the Road King and pointed himself west toward home. Rain caught him 20 miles out, running on habit and muscle memory. The way you do when you've been riding long enough that the road stops being something you think about and starts being something you feel. When he saw the sign for the Morrow Creek filling station. The place had been closed for years, he knew that. Sepp Coat had ridden past it 100 times in daylight and seen the boarded windows and the rusted pumps and the hand-lettered sign that said closed for business that someone had tacked up, and the weather had been slowly destroying ever since. It was paved, and it was set back from the road. And right now what Jax needed more than anything was 30 seconds out of the rain to pull on the extra layer. He had bunged to the back of his seat. In. Cut the engine. The silence. The silence that followed wasn't quite exactly the rain, was hammering the asphalt and drumming against the metal awning over the old pump island and running hard through the drainage gutter along the side of the building. But it was a different than the road noise. And after 2 hours of engine and wind, it felt almost peaceful. The bungee cords loose. He dismounted, pulled out the thermal underlayer he'd packed that morning, hooking his arms through the sleeves when the sound reached him. He stopped, stood absolutely still. The rain kept coming. The drainage gutter kept running. In the pine trees that pressed in close on the back edge of the lot, something moved in the branches. A bird startled by the storm, maybe just the wind. And underneath all of it, so faint, he almost talked himself out of having heard it at all. Sound, not the rain, not the trees, not anything that belonged to an empty lot on an empty road in the middle of an October storm. Child crying. Jax didn't move for 5 full seconds. Was doing what brain on his coat. His brain was doing what brains do when they receive information. They aren't prepared for cycling through alternative explanations, looking for the one that made more sense. An animal. An acoustic trick. The wind doing something strange through the old building's broken boards. Exhaustion, manufacturing things out of white noise. His body wasn't waiting for his brain to finish the argument. He walking was bigger than it looked from the road. The old station had a service garage attached to the right side, and a chain-link fence along the back, and in the far left corner, tucked in beside the fence where the awning's shadow fell deepest, sat a car he hadn't seen when he pulled in. A colored older model, sitting at an angle, like it had been pulled in fast and not straightened out. On day tote, the headlights were off. The engine was off. From 20 feet away, it looked abandoned, just another piece of debris the old station had collected. From 15 feet away, he could hear it more clearly. From 10 feet away, there was no question. Someone was crying inside that car. He slowed his approach instinctively. He'd learned, to move around anything that might be frightened slow. This is deliberate, no sudden motions. Were quiet on the wet asphalt. He came around to the driver's side first, looked through the window, saw nothing. The interior was dark. He moved to the rear passenger window and put his face close to the glass. A child, curled up on the back seat with her knees pulled to her chest and both arms wrapped around them, her face turned toward the seat back, her whole body drawn into the smallest possible shape. Hair, wet at the edges, where it had gotten into the gap of a window, cracked open an inch, enough that she barely took up half the seat. And shaking. Not from the cold, though the car wasn't warm. Shaking the way a person shakes when they've been afraid for a long time and the fear has moved past the acute and settled into the body as a permanent condition. Jax stood there for a moment with his hands an inch from the door handle and his heart doing something in his chest that he hadn't felt it do in a very long time. Then he knocked, gently, 3 times on the glass with one knuckle. His whole body went rigid. She didn't look up. He kept voice low, lower than the rain, not trying to project through the glass, but just talking, so she could hear the tone of it. I'm not going to hurt you. I promise. I just need to know you're okay. Nothing. She didn't move. My name is Jax. I'm just a guy who pulled in here to get out of the rain. You crying, and I can't drive away without knowing you're all right. That's all. You don't have to talk to me if you don't want to. Pause, a long one. And then very slowly, she turned her head. Than he'd first thought 6, maybe 7. Though fear made children look younger. Her eyes were enormous and red-rimmed from crying. Her face pale and streaked, her lower lip still trembling. Even though she'd stopped making sound the moment she heard his voice. Looked him through the window the way a cornered animal looks at a hand, reaching toward it, terrified and utterly without options. Jax didn't move toward the door. He stayed where he was, one hand on the roof of the car, the other hanging loose at his side, giving her the choice. You don't have to open the door, he said. Hurt. Or if something's wrong, I need you to tell me. Can you do that? She stared at him for another long moment. Then she said, in a voice barely above a whisper, where is my mama? It landed like a punch to the sternum. Jax exhaled slowly through his nose. I don't know, sweetheart. I just got here. Is your mama supposed to be with you? A nod, small and frightened. Okay. He kept his voice steady because the last thing she needed right now was to see the thing happening in his chest reflected in his face. Let's figure this out together. Is the door locked? Is at the door beside her with an expression that said she didn't know, that she hadn't thought about that the door had simply been the barrier between herself and everything outside, and she hadn't considered it as a mechanism. She reached out a small hand and pulled the inner handle. Door swung open. She immediately pressed herself back against the far side of the seat, as far from the opening as she could get, watching him with those enormous eyes. Jax crouched down, so he wasn't looming. He rested one arm on the doorframe and kept himself below her eye level, making himself smaller, which wasn't a thing he did naturally or easily, but which felt necessary right now. He said, Hi, she whispered. What's your name? A hesitation. He could see her weighing it, whether names were information, whether information was dangerous, whether this enormous man with the rain running down his face and the skull on his vest was the kind of person you gave your name to. V, she said finally. Hi, Sophie. I'm Jax. How long have you been in the car? About it. A long time. It was still light when Mama put me in. It was past 11 at night. Jax did the math and didn't let what the math produced reach his face. Mama say where she was going. Sophie shook her head. Stopped. She said to stay. She said, stay in the car and don't open the door for anyone, and she'd come right back. Her voice broke on the last word. She said right back. But it got dark and she didn't come back, and I was scared and I kept crying and nobody stopped. I stopped, Jax said. She looked at him. You stopped. I stopped. I stopped. He watched something shift in her expression. Not trust exactly, because children who have learned to be afraid don't surrender that learning in 60 seconds, but something adjacent to trust. Recognition that the statement was simply true. That whatever else he was or wasn't, this man had stopped. Is in my vest pocket, he said. I need to take it out so I can call for help. Is that okay? She nodded. He retrieved it slowly, kept the screen facing her so she could see what he was doing, and dialed 911. The dispatcher answered on the second ring. This is Jax Callahan. I'm at the old Morrow Creek filling station on Route 9, east of Millhaven. Got a child here, approximately 7 years old, been alone in a vehicle since daylight. She's unharmed, but frightened. Her mother is unaccounted for. I need a welfare check and possibly a search. Please send someone out here. The information twice over, because the rain was interfering with the connection. Then ended the call and looked at Sophie. Is coming, he said. It'll take maybe 20 minutes for someone to get out here. Old. She nodded. Okay. He straightened up. To go to my motorcycle, that's my bike, over by the old pump, and get a jacket from my bag. I'm going to stay where you can see me the whole time. Okay? Okay, she said. He walked slowly, keeping his body turned so she could see his face, and retrieved the extra thermal from where he'd left it draped over the seat. Grabbed the granola bars he kept. In the left saddlebag, 2 of them, peanut butter. The kind that were more sugar than anything else, and he came back and held them out to her. One. Looked at it. Are you hungry? He asked. Then eat it. It's not great, but it's food. She ate half of it in about 30 seconds, which told him something about how long she'd actually been alone. Sat down on the wet asphalt beside the open car door, his back against the rear quarter panel, making himself as unthreatening as possible. And she watched him from the seat above. Have a skull on your thing, she said. She meant the vest. I do. Is that bad? He thought about that. Some people think so. I think it's just a symbol, like a team jersey. What team? My team. The people I ride with. She ate some more of the granola bar, watching him. Are they nice? Some of them are the nicest people I've ever known, he said honestly. Them take some getting used to, like Mr. Henderson at school, she said, with the absolute certainty of a child who has decided an analogy works. He's mean at first, but then he lets you keep a library book for an extra week if you're polite about it. Exactly like that, Jack said. For a few minutes, neither of them spoke, and the rain came down. In the direction of town, there was a faint flicker of heat lightning, away for thunder. Then Sophie said quietly, "Very, she's coming back, right?" "My mama?" Jax turned his head and looked at her. She was gripping the granola bar wrapper in both hands. It was tight, twisted, her eyes not on him, but on the entrance to the lot, watching the road the way you watch something, when watching is the only thing you have left. "I'm going to do everything I can to find her," he said. "It was my promise." It wasn't the answer she'd asked for. He knew that. But he wasn't willing to make a promise he couldn't keep. Not to this child, not on a night that had already taken enough from her. And something in her face told him she understood the difference. She said. She finished the granola bar, out her hand for the wrapper, and he held out his hand flat, palm, and she placed it carefully in his blanket. They'd been doing this for years, and he folded it into his jacket pocket. The next 18 minutes were the longest Jax Callahan could remember sitting through in a very long time. As Miss Sauber, he talked to her. Small things about what grade she was in, about whether she had a favorite subject in school, about whether she had a pet, about what kind of music her mom played in the car. She was in second grade. She liked reading and hated math, and was deeply offended by the concept of fractions, which he told her was a reasonable position that many intelligent adults shared. She didn't have a pet, but she wanted a dog, specifically a yellow dog. She'd decided the color was important. Her mom played a lot of country music, and also sometimes oldies that Sophie thought were boring, but she'd learned not to say so because it made her mom get a sad look. Everything she said away, somewhere behind his sternum, some chamber he hadn't opened in a long time, and he kept his voice even and his posture relaxed, and his eyes checking the road every 45 seconds without being obvious about it. She didn't notice. Or she did notice, and she chose not to ask. The squad car pulled into the lot. Murphy's whole body went rigid again, not toward the door. Away from it, pressing back into the seat. Jax was on his feet before the car stopped moving. The deputy was young, maybe 26, Kent-haired, dark, and he came out of the car, already reaching for the radio on his shoulder. Jax stepped forward and spoke first, quietly, keeping his body positioned so the deputy would look at him rather than immediately at Sophie. "I'm Jax Callahan. I called it in. The child is in the back seat of that vehicle. Her name is Sophie. She's approximately 7. She's been here since daylight. She's frightened of strangers. I need you to go slow." The deputy looked at him, looked at the vest, at the patches, at the skull. Already pulling on his coat, ran through whatever calculus people ran through when they saw what Jax looked like, and Jax held still and let him do it. The deputy nodded. "Okay. You're sure she's unharmed?" "As I can tell. I haven't touched her. She took the granola bar herself. About the mother. Unaccounted for. She told the child she'd come right back. That was this afternoon." The deputy spoke into the radio, called for a second unit and a search coordinate, and then followed Jax's lead in approaching the car slowly. He saw the uniform, and her eyes went wide. "It's okay," Jax said immediately, dropping back to crouching beside the door. "To help find your mama." He looked up at the deputy, as the deputy said. He crouched too, mirroring Jax's posture. "Hi, Sophie." Sophie looked between them. "You're going to look for her?" "We're here," Torres said. "Can you tell me anything about where your mom went?" "Which direction?" Sophie pointed. "Behind the old station, toward the tree line at the back of the lot." Men looked in that direction. "Was anyone with her? Or following her?" Jax asked, keeping his voice neutral. And here was the moment. Here was the scene, in the evening, where everything that had seemed simple revealed itself to be something else entirely. His face changed. The fear that had been general and ambient, the fear of a child alone in the dark, sharpened into something specific, something learned. The look of a child who has been taught that certain information is dangerous to share, who has processed at some deep level, that some answers lead to worse problems than the questions they solve. Jack said gently, whatever you know, you can tell Deputy Torres. It's safe. She looked at him for a long time. Mama said we had to hide, she said finally. She said we had to be very quiet and very still. She said if anyone found the car and asked about us, I should say. She stopped, her lips together. She said I should say, we were just stopping for a rest. What I was supposed to say. Jackson Torres exchanged a look over her head. You're not going to say, that Jack said. It wasn't a question. It shook her head. Because you stopped. You kept your promise. You stayed. He felt that in the same place he'd felt the first cry, somewhere deep and structural, somewhere that had been quiet for a long time. Tell us, he said. There was a man, Sophie said. Saw him at the gas station, at the gas stand where we stopped for lunch. She got really scared. She paid fast, and we drove away really fast, and she kept looking in the mirrors. She said, we had to find somewhere to stop where nobody could see us. She found this place. Looked around the lot, at the dark station building, at the rain-slicked asphalt, at the old chain-link fence. Me in the back seat and told me to stay down. And then she heard something in the trees and she went to look. For how long ago? Torres asked. The car clock said 7-something when she left. Sophie's voice was perfectly steady now, the way children's voices go when they have moved past fear and into the place where only facts remain. Until the battery died. Jack stood up. He looked pulling on its Torres. This was already on the radio again, filling in the new details, requesting additional units, listing a K9 if one was available. Jax walked to the edge of the awning shadow and stared toward the tree line. Rain was letting up, slightly still falling, but finding its rhythm now, consistent rather than violent. He could see maybe 30 feet into the dark before the pine trees swallowed everything. Emily, he thought. Her name is Emily, and she went into those trees, and she hasn't come back. About the man Sophie had described. The one who'd been at the gas station. Her mother had spotted and recognized and fled from with practiced speed. Not the panicked flight of someone encountering a threat for the first time, but the fast movement of someone who had run from this specific threat before and knew exactly what it meant that he was here again. That kind of running. He'd seen it, more than seen it. Back to Sophie. She was sitting up properly now. The jacket he'd given her, the thermal jacket, wrapped around her shoulders like a blanket, watching him with those steady, knowing eyes. Has been hiding for a while, hasn't she? He said. Not just tonight. Sophie looked at him. In the pale light from Torres's squad car, her face was absolutely serious. Long time, she said. She says it's not forever. She says forever is a lie people tell to make you stop fighting. She said it the way children say things that have been said to them many times, the cadence of it worn smooth from repetition. One day we'll be safe. Jax felt something harden behind his ribs. Anger or something, older and colder and more useful than anger. And fine, something that in another man might have been called resolve, but in him had no name because it had never needed one. It was simply the thing that happened when he understood clearly what needed to be done. Did Torres, I'm going to the tree line. I can't allow a civilian. You've got one unit, it's no K9 yet, who's been missing for approximately 4 hours in the dark and the rain. He said it evenly, without challenge, because this wasn't about his ego. I know these woods. I've ridden this road my whole life. I'm going to interfere with your search. But I'm not standing in a parking lot while someone is in those trees. He was young, but he wasn't stupid. He looked at Jax for a moment, weighing it. On the right perimeter, he said. Don't touch anything. Find her. You call out. You don't move her. Agreed. Jax looked back at Sophie one more time, watching him with that steady, grave attention that he was already coming to understand was simply who she was. Promised, he said. I know, she said. He walked toward the tree line. The rain was soft on his shoulders, cold and consistent, running down the back of his neck and under his collar. He'd left the thermal with Sophie, so there was nothing between him and the October cold except the flannel shirt and the leather vest, and he didn't care. Before 10, along the right edge of the lot. The fence met the tree line, just stepping carefully, scanning the dark between the trunks. He'd been at it for maybe 6 minutes when he heard Torres shout from somewhere to his left. He didn't run. He moved fast but controlled. The way you move when you don't know what you're going to find and you need your hands and your head steady when you get there. Against the base of a pine tree, about 40 feet into the tree line, sitting with her back to the trunk, canned and both arms wrapped around herself. She was conscious. She was looking up at Torres with the eyes of someone who has been found by the wrong person before and is still processing whether being found this time is better or worse. She was younger than Jax had somehow expected, late 20s maybe, with dark hair plastered flat against her face from the rain and a cut on her left forearm that had stopped bleeding but hadn't been tended. Clothes were soaked. She was shaking visibly, and she looked at Torres with absolute bone-deep terror. "Fee," she said. Her voice cracked on the word. "Is my daughter? Where is she's safe?" Torres said immediately. "She's in the parking lot. She's okay." Emily's face crumpled for just a moment, relief and grief running together in the way they do when fear has been held too long and finally gets to put something down. And then she pulled it back, pulled herself straight, started to stand. Jax came through the trees. She saw him. Vest, the skull, the size of him, coming through the dark. And Finny Torres had just told her seemed to fly out of her head. Her whole body reacted. She scrambled to her feet, backing against the tree trunk, her eyes gone wide and fixed on Jax with an expression that was pure fight or flight. Hodbaum, the animal response of someone who had learned to be afraid of large men in the dark. Jax stopped immediately. His hands came up, open, palms out, and he took a deliberate step back. "Not who you're afraid of," he said. "I'm the one who found Sophie. She's in the parking lot. She's safe. She ate a granola bar, and she told me she wants a yellow dog." Something in those last words, the specific, unmistakable detail of a man who had actually listened to her daughter, reached past the fear. Emily stared at him. Her chest was heaving. Her hands were pressed flat against the tree trunk behind her. She said. "She found me," he said. Was crying. "I heard her from across the lot." Emily looked at Torres. Torres gave her a small nod that seemed to confirm everything Jax had said, and her gaze came back to Jax, and this time it was different. Wary. Still the wariness of someone who had very good reasons to be wary of everyone. But underneath it, not something else, the painful, reluctant, and yet undeniable recognition that this man, frightening man, with the skull on his chest, was telling her the truth. "I need to see her," Emily said. "We're going right now," Torres said. Her arm as they came back through the trees. Jax walked ahead, giving them space. He came out of the tree line first. Murphy saw him from the back seat of the squad car, where Torres had moved her while Jax was in the woods. Out of the car, before Torres could get there. She ran across the wet asphalt, and she stopped about 3 feet in front of Jax, and she looked up at him with those enormous eyes. "Her," she said. "Deputy Torres found her. Lost him the direction. I just showed him the direction." Sophie's seriousness of a child, evaluating an accurate but incomplete answer. "Looked," she said. "I looked," he agreed, and wrapped both arms around his left leg, pressing her face against his thigh, and held on. It was not a dramatic gesture. It was simply the act of a tired child who had decided after a very long and frightening night that she had found something solid enough to hold. Put one large hand very carefully on the top of her head, came out of the trees and stopped. She saw Jax. She saw her daughter. She saw her daughter. She saw her daughter's arms around this man's leg, and this man's hand, gentle on her daughter's hair, and she stood there in the rain, with her face doing something complicated that was nowhere close to finished resolving itself. Jax looked up and met her eyes. He didn't say anything. Inzitan. Sometimes things didn't need saying. Sometimes you just stood in the rain in an abandoned parking lot with a child's arms around your leg and a frightened woman looking at you from 12 feet away, and you let the moment be exactly what it was. Emily walked forward. She went to her daughter first, crouching down, pulling Sophie against her chest and holding her with the particular fierceness of a mother who has had one too many close calls to take holding her child for granted. Sophie said something into her mother's shoulder that Jax couldn't hear. Emily pulled back and looked at her daughter's face. I said he stopped, Sophie said. Everybody drove past and he stopped. Emily looked up at Jax. Her eyes were wet from the rain, maybe, or from something that had nothing to do with the rain. Thank you, she said. Don't thank me yet, Jax said, and his voice was quiet, but there was something in it that made Emily's expression sharpen. Something that said this night was not yet over. Something that said the man who had been at the gas station earlier today was still somewhere out there in the dark, and whatever he wanted, he hadn't gone home simply because they'd found a better hiding place. This in front of Sophie. He didn't say this, heard it anyway, because mothers who have been running long enough learn to hear the things that aren't said. Up with Sophie in her arms, and she looked at Jax Callahan, this man, who had no reason to stop, who had every excuse in the world to keep riding, had looked through the window of a dark car in the rain and crouched down to a child's level and promised to look, and then kept the promise, and something in her face shifted in a way that was not yet trust, but was something important. The beginning of something. And Jax, who had spent 22 years telling himself he was built for solitary road and nothing else, felt it land somewhere in his chest and stay there. Behind him, this was on the radio again, relaying the new details. Suspect came through, clearly. Did description and vehicle registration and escalate to county. She had both arms around her mother's neck and her face pressed against her mother's jaw. And her eyes, her mother's shoulder, is on Jax. She mouthed something. He read it. Thank you. He nodded once. Rain kept falling. The old station sat dark and patient around them. Ethel, and somewhere, out on Route 9, past the reach of the squad car's lights, the night held whatever it was going to bring next. Got Emily a blanket from the trunk of the squad car, the silver emergency kind, mylar that crinkled with every movement, and she wrapped it around Sophie and held her daughter against her chest and kept her face very still while Torres asked her the questions that needed asking. Name, age, where she'd been staying, how long she'd been in the area. She'd filed any reports anywhere. Jax stood at the edge of the light and listened without appearing to listen. He was good at that. 22 years of riding with a club, of sitting in rooms where information got passed around the table in pieces, had taught him how to tack in everything while looking at nothing in particular. Emily's face while she answered Torres's questions, and what he saw there was not the face of some being evasive. The face of someone performing a very careful calculation in real time, deciding word by word how much truth was safe to give and how much truth would pull the ceiling down on her. In her late 20s, he now thought, maybe 30 at the outside, had the kind of face that had once been open and probably still would be in circumstances that allowed for it. Was there right now, underneath the rain and the exhaustion and the cut on her arm that Torres had bandaged with the first aid kit from the cruiser. A controlled flatness, the face of someone who had learned that showing fear was worse than feeling it. She knew exactly who she was afraid of. That much was clear. What wasn't clear yet was why. Ma'am, Torres said, I have to ask you directly. What individual you believe you saw at the gas station this afternoon, do you know this person? Emily looked at Sophie. Sophie had her face turned into the blanket, her breathing slow and heavy. It was fading towards sleep, the way only very young children could, her body finally releasing a day's worth of terror in one long exhale. Emily shifted her. So Sophie's head rested more securely against her shoulder, and then she looked back at Torres. Yes, she said. I know him. Can you give me a name? So fine you could have sliced it. Dennis Farrow, she said. Wrote it down. Torres wrote it down. His pen moved carefully, pressing hard. The way you write something you understand might matter later. Relationship to Mr. Farrow. Emily's jaw tightened. It's my husband. Torres looked up from the notepad. Jax looked at the asphalt, was Torres said. We've been separated for 14 months. I have a protective order from Hillard County. Filed 13 months ago. Into her jacket pocket, and for a second, Jax thought she was going to produce the document itself. The way people carry those orders folded into quarters, transferring them from coat to coat because they've learned to keep the paper close. She didn't pull it out. Her hand just rested inside the pocket, fingers on it, and he understood that she was simply confirming to herself it was there. Violated it twice. Both times the charges were reduced. Times I was told it would be better if she stopped. The blanket over Sophie's shoulder. I was told a lot of things. Did you leave Hillard County? Torres asked. 7 weeks ago. Are you staying locally? We were at the Pineview Motel in Granville. She said the name with the practiced neutrality of someone reading an address off a form. From 11. We've been there 3 weeks. I paid cash. I used my sister's last name for the registration. Believe Farrow located you. I believe he's been locating me for 14 months, Emily said. Time, I think I've lost him. He finds us. Not right away. It takes a few weeks, but he always finds us. She said it with absolutely no drama, which somehow made it worse. Simple, exhausted, terrible fact. I don't know how. Stopped using my cards. I stopped calling anyone he might know. I stopped everything. Torres clicked the pen. I'm going to need you to come to the station and make a formal statement, miss, she said. Emily Baxter. I kept my maiden name on the protective order. It's Baxter. We can put out a description on Farrow, and if he's in the area. He's, Emily said, before poot, without heat, without flinching. He's in drive-through an area. He parks and he waits. He's patient. That's the thing people don't understand about him. It's like a regular person. He has a regular person's face. He'll wait as long as it takes. The silence that followed that statement sat on all three of them. Shifted in her sleep, made a small sound, resettled. Ez was looking at Emily with the expression of a young deputy who had been trained for certain kinds of situations and was now standing at the edge of one that his training had underestimated. Jax picked his next words carefully. Miss Baxter, you said you went into the tree line because you heard something. Emily looked at him. She had the slightly startled quality of someone who keeps forgetting. He's there not because he was easy to overlook, but because she was working so hard to manage the official situation that the unofficial one kept catching her off guard. Yes, she said. What did you hear? A footstep on the gravel along the back fence. Her chin came up slightly. How his footstep sounds. I know how he moves. 18 months is long enough to learn those things. But you didn't see him. No. I went toward the sound because I thought. She stopped. Recalibrated. I thought if he was coming toward the car, toward Sophie, I could draw him away from me instead of finding her. The statement was so simple and so devastating that for a moment, nobody said anything. She had walked into the dark on purpose, away from Sophie into whatever was following her, because she'd calculated that Sophie in the car was safer than Sophie in the open. She had used herself as the diversion. Jax looked at this woman, this exhausted, controlled, terrified woman who had made that decision in about 3 seconds, and something in his chest rearranged itself into a different configuration. Well, he said. She glanced at her arm. The ground dropped off farther into the trees than I expected. I went down on my side. By the time I got up, I'd lost my sense of direction, and I couldn't make noise to call for Sophie, because if he was still out there. She stopped again. I just held still and waited. For what? She looked at him steadily. Whatever came next. Torres cleared his throat. We need to get you both somewhere warm and get your statement on record. Anyone who can. There's no one, Emily said. Final. The way someone says something they have already made peace with 100 times. It looked like he wanted to say something to that and didn't have the words for it. Jax pulled out his phone. To make one call, he said. And Emily, looking at making it a statement of intent rather than a request for permission. The woman I'm calling is named Rosa. She runs the family services end of what our chapter does. She has a house in Millhaven with 2 spare rooms, and she has never in her life met a crisis she couldn't manage. I'm not suggesting you trust me. I'm suggesting you meet Rosa before you decide. Emily looked at him for a long time. She looked at Sophie. Back at Jack's. Make the call, she said. Already dialing, Nas answered. On. The third ring sounding not remotely like someone who had been asleep, which meant she either hadn't been or she was the kind of person who came up from sleep running. And Jax had always believed it was both simultaneously. Almost midnight. I know. I need a favor. You do. There was no irritation in it. Rosa, 63 years old, 5'2", like someone had compressed a much larger personality into a smaller container. It happened. He gave her the condensed version. And child, 14 months running. A protective order with teeth that hadn't been sharp enough. A man named Pharaoh, who was patient in the worst possible way. People who had nowhere to go, and a child who needed to sleep in a real bed. It was quiet for exactly 4 seconds. Bring them, she said. Have the room ready and food on. Rosa, it's midnight. Already pulling on a coat. You want to tell me the child isn't hungry? He looked at Sophie, who had woken slightly at the sound of his voice and was watching him with half-lidded eyes from the shelter of her mother's shoulder. Already ate both my granola bars, he said. Then she needs real food. Bring them, Jax. He ended the call and looked at Emily. On his coat. She had been watching his face while he talked, reading him the way you read someone when you've learned that what people say and what people mean are very often different things, and the difference matters enormously. It's like she means it, Emily said. Rosa always means it. Genuinely decent person I know, and she will be annoyed with me if I tell you that, because she considers herself completely ordinary. The very first time all night, something moved through Emily Baxter's face that was not fear or calculation or exhausted endurance. It was there and gone in a second, almost too fast to catch. But Jax caught it. It might have been the faint, barely surviving outline of a smile. Ran the logistics while Jax called Petey, his vice president, and gave him the description of Pharaoh and the vehicle he might be driving. Emily had remembered the car from Hillard County, a gray sedan, model, and asked him to put the word out quietly to anyone riding tonight. A search, Petey asked. I want awareness, not a vigilante squad. But if someone spots that car, I want to know before Torres does. Be on it, Petey said, and hung up. It took 40 minutes to get the basics sorted. It was arranged for a second unit to Torres arranged for a second unit to take Emily's statement rather than making her drive all the way into the county seat tonight. He put out the description on Pharaoh. He asked Emily 3 more times if she was certain she didn't want to go to the hospital for the arm, and she said she was certain each time with the patientless precision of someone who had said that particular sentence in that particular tone before. Sophie was awake again by the time they got to the squad car. She was sitting up straight. She was the thermal jacket still around her shoulders, watching everything with those dark eyes that missed nothing and told you nothing about what they were seeing. To Jax, when he came to the car to tell them Rosa's address. Are you coming, she asked. Not to Rosa's tonight. We'll take you. But I'll come by tomorrow to check on you. V looked at him with the expression of a child, running a quick verification. Promise or just something people say? He felt that one land. Promise, he said. She nodded once, satisfied, and tucked herself back against her mother's side. On first 6 mile. Jax followed Torres's squad car in his Road King, keeping to the center of the road, watching the dark edges of the shoulders for a gray sedan parked where it shouldn't be. He didn't see one. Didn't mean it wasn't there. He peeled off. When they hit the Millhaven town limits, where the streetlights started in the dark retreat head to something manageable, and he watched the red taillights of the cruiser until they turned the corner and were gone. He sat in the road for a moment, with the engine running. Cry from a parked car. A 4 hours alone in the dark. Woman who walked toward danger to pull it away from her daughter. A man named Pharaoh, who was patient in the worst possible way. Jax pulled in a long breath and let it out slowly. Home. He did not sleep. He was at the chapter's garage by 6 in the morning, sitting at the workbench with a cup of coffee that had been fresh about 4 cups ago when Bull came in and stopped in the doorway. Was 6'4" and had the actual shoulders of someone who had been loading freight since he was 16, which was exactly what he had been doing since he was 16. 31, and he had been Jax's sergeant-at-arms for 7 years, which meant he had learned to read the particular quality of Jax's stillness very accurately. Like you didn't sleep, Bull said. I didn't. Go bad? The run was fine. Jax turned the coffee cup on the workbench. I found a kid at the Morrow Creek station on the way back. And her mother. They've got a situation. Did it again. Don's time in 12 hours. And each time he told it, the thing that struck him hardest was the same detail. The footstep in the dark. And the woman who'd walked toward it on purpose. Listened the way. Bull listened to everything with his full attention and almost no expression, storing information without reaction, which was one of the many things that made him excellent at what he did. When Jax finished, Bull was quiet for a moment. How old's the kid, he said. 7. Approximately 2nd grade, hates fractions. Nodded slowly. And this Pharaoh character. Protective order from Hillard County. Violated it twice. Charges reduced both times. Both times, Bull repeated. Both times. Bull picked up his own cup from the shelf above the workbench and drank from it and didn't say anything else for a moment. You want us involved. I want you to know the situation, Jax said. What happens after that is a conversation. It's not really a conversation, is it? Said. But there's no particular emphasis. Jax didn't answer. Bull pulled out his phone. I'll get Petey to keep the description circulating. Going to Rose's this morning? After I call Torres and see where the statement went. Torres, when he picked up, sounded like he'd had about as much sleep as Jax. The statement is filed, he said. We've flagged Pharaoh's name at the county level and sent the description to surrounding departments. If he's running active on that license plate, it'll come up. If, Jax said. If, Torres confirmed, and the words sat between them heavy with the understanding that people like Pharaoh generally took precautions about things like license plates. Baxter is at Rosa Mendez's house. The child is okay. Slept a few hours. A pause, Mr. Callahan. It's worth what you did last night. Staying with the child. Don't, Jack said. Paused. Sir, don't thank me for stopping. Stopping was the minimum. Any person who heard that crying should have stopped. Pause. Yes, sir, Torres said. I'll be in touch if anything develops. Axe arrived at Rosa's house at 9:30. Rosa met him at the door before he knocked, which meant she'd heard the motorcycle from 2 blocks out, which was always the case. A woman with silver hair, worn in a braid over one shoulder, and reading glasses pushed up on her forehead that she put on to look at things near and took off to look at things far, had never in Jax's memory been anything other than completely decided about every situation she encountered. They're at the kitchen table, she said. The girl ate a bowl of oatmeal and half a piece of toast, and then she saw my cat and the toast was forgotten. Coffee. I have coffee in my blood at this point. So that's yes. Come in. Sophie was on the floor of the kitchen with Rosa's enormous orange cat, Perkins, who was tolerating being petted with the martyred patience of a creature that had no choice. Heard boots on the linoleum, she looked up. Her face did something immediate and uncomplicated when she saw Jax, the kind of expression that children produce before they've learned to manage it, a sharp relief. Clean is there and visible and real. She said. I said I would. People say things, she told him, petting Perkins with the automatic motion of someone thinking about something else. Mostly they don't do them. Some of us do, he said, and pulled out the chair across from her and sat down. Emily was at the table with a mug of coffee and the look of someone who had slept maybe 3 hours and was making extremely efficient use of the 3 she'd gotten. Lee pulling on his coat. She was dry now, in borrowed clothes of Rosa's that were slightly too small through the shoulders, and the bandage on her arm had been changed to a cleaner one. Looked at him with the same careful wariness she'd had the night before, calibrated differently in the daylight, less immediate, more measured. The needle on an instrument that's been bumped, settling back toward its resting point. Morning, she said. Morning, how's the arm? Fine. So is very efficient. She said it with something that might, in better circumstances, have been warmth. Rosa appeared from the direction of the pantry with a coffee mug the size of a small bowl and set it in front of Jax without being asked. To Irene at County social services this morning, she said, addressing them all equally. Our options. But they take time. And time is the thing we don't know how much of you have. Emily looked at her hands around the mug. He'll find us here eventually. And I don't know how long it takes, but he'll find us. Found you 7 times in 14 months. See, Rosa said the directness. That was simply how Rosa talked, not brutal, but not cushioned. That's not luck. Emily looked up sharply. Somebody's helping him, Rosa said. The kitchen was quiet, except for Perkins rumbling under Sophie's hand. Emily set the mug down. When she spoke, her voice was very controlled. About that, I've thought about it every time. I can't figure out who. You don't have to figure it out today, Rosa said, to take it seriously as a fact rather than a possibility. If someone is feeding him your locations, then changing locations alone won't solve the problem. Emily looked at Jax. He nodded slightly. She's right. Do? You let us help you figure it out, Rosa said, with the list of everyone who's known where you were at each stop for the past 14 months. Emily was quiet for a moment. Sophie had stopped petting the cat. She was listening with that grave, adult attention she brought to everything important. And Jax noticed that Emily noticed, and that Emily made the decision to speak anyway. Make that list, Emily said slowly. It goes back to the beginning. County, to people I trusted. Yes, Rosa said, usually where these things start. My sister knew every place, Emily said. She's the one who... I used her name at the motel. She set up the cash transfers. She stopped. She couldn't. I'm not saying she did, Rosa said. I'm saying she's on the list. Emily stood up from the table, to the window over the sink, and stood there, with her back to the room. And Jax could see from the line of her shoulders the particular effort it took to hold that posture, the effort of someone absorbing information that had the shape of a betrayal and refusing to let it bend them. Looked at Jax. He shook his head slightly. Let her be. Sophie understood. She went back to petting the cat. A long moment, Emily turned back around. Her face was composed. Whatever the window conversation had cost her, she'd paid privately. Right, she said. I'll make the list. It took 2 hours. Rosa produced a yellow legal pad, and Emily wrote in small, handwriting, Fab P. And Rosa asked questions, and Jax listened, and occasionally asked one of his own. And Sophie fell asleep on the kitchen floor, with Perkins curled against her back. By 11:30, they had 11 names in 12 locations, and a timeline that laid out 14 months of running in a way that made the geography of it visible, the shape of someone being systematically being found just long enough after each escape to believe it had worked this time, and then being found again. Jax looked at the timeline for a long time. Hillard County, he said. Emily looked at the page. What about it? 3 of the first 4 locations. He had you within 2 weeks of each. After you crossed into this county, it started taking longer. Weeks the first time, 7 the next. He tapped the paper. The connection is closer to Hillard County. Someone with access there, not someone you called along the way. In Orst, Emily stared at the timeline. Her face went through several things in quick succession. First, eating. Not because she hadn't considered it, he could see that she had. She was landing on something specific now, something the list had forced into visibility, and it was worse than the general version she'd been carrying. House, she said quietly. Rosa looked up. When I filed the protective order, Emily said. The first one. There was a clerk who processed it. Farrow's family, his uncle, is on the county commission. They've lived in Hillard County for 3 generations and knows everyone. She pressed her fingertips to the table. In that courthouse was passing information, not what you'd call informing. Just mentioning to the right person that a certain filing came through, that an address was on. She stopped. She looked at Jax. That's not a supposition, she said. He said, that's most of the explanation. Information settled over the kitchen. The way heavy things settle, not with a crash, but with a slow compressing weight. I can make a call, Jax said. I know a man in Hillard County, one of ours, who works courthouse records as a day job. Not asking him to do anything he shouldn't, just to look at the access log on your filing and tell me if there's a pattern and who pulled it up. Emily looked at him. That's legal? He's authorized to access those logs. He volunteers what he finds is his business. Quiet for a moment. Then, do it. Jack stepped into the hallway to make the call. He was on the phone for 6 minutes. When he came back, his face was giving away less than usual, which Emily had already learned to read as meaning more than usual. Look today, he said. He'll call me by tonight. Rosa was already on her feet refilling the coffee. Was stirring on the floor. And Perkins took the opportunity to reclaim his dignity by moving to look to windowsill and looking at them all as if they'd interrupted something important. Sat up and looked at Jax. Sophie sat up. There were indentations in her cheek from sleeping on her folded arm, and her hair had gone sideways, and she was completely unself-conscious about both. What happens now? She asked. Now, Rosa said firmly, you eat something real. And I are going to find a puzzle to put together because I have a feeling it is that kind of afternoon. Sophie considered this. Does it have pictures of animals? Pictures of exactly that. Sophie stood up and looked at Jax once more, the quick verification look that he was already starting to recognize as her particular habit, checking that he was still there, still real, still the thing he presented himself as being. He gave her a nod. She followed Rosa toward the living room. Emily watched her daughter go. Then she turned to Jax and she said, in a voice that had dropped low enough that it wouldn't carry, she doesn't do that with people. That thing she does with you, checking on you. She did it with me, and that's it. Nobody else. Jax wasn't sure what to say to that. She's a good judge, Emily said. And then, before he could respond, I need to ask you something, and I need you to tell me the truth, even if you think I don't want to hear it. How serious is this? Not the version where you try to keep me calm. The version. The real version. He looked at her for a moment. Just looked back at him with absolute steadiness. Understood that she was asking, not because she was falling apart, but because she was one of those people who needed the actual terrain, really pull information, who could handle the real information and couldn't handle the managed version. A man who has found you 7 times in 14 months and has family connections to the system that's supposed to protect you, he said quietly, is a serious problem. Not an unsolvable one, but serious. She absorbed that without flinching. The next thing that helps, the call from my contact in Hillard County, and you staying put here, which I know is hard. I'm not good at staying put. I know, but moving right now helps Pharaoh more than it helps you. He pulling on his coat. She thought about it. Then she looked toward the living room, where they could hear Sophie negotiating something about puzzle strategy. She likes you, Emily said. She doesn't like people. Her 6 months to talk to her teacher. She likes the cat too, Jack said. Perkins has not earned it, Emily said. Before it was dry enough and quick enough that Jax almost missed it. He caught it something in him, relaxed a fraction. Stay here today, he said. I'll be back tonight when I hear from Hillard County. And if the news is bad, then we deal with what the news actually is, he said. Version of it we're afraid of. The actual thing. Emily looked at him for one long moment. You always do that? She said. Deal with the actual thing. I try to. She nodded. It was not quite trust. It was something adjacent, and in her circumstances, adjacent was enormous. He had his hand on the front door when her voice came from the kitchen entrance behind him. Jax. He turned. She was standing in the hallway with her arms crossed, not defensively, but the way you cross your arms when you're cold or tired, and she looked at him with those careful eyes. This night, she said, when you came through the trees, I was terrified of you. I know. And then Sophie had her arms around your leg, and you had your hand on her head, and I thought she stopped. I thought, whatever he is, it's not what I thought he was. Did say anything. I just wanted you to know that, she said. I think you're the kind of person that nobody ever bothers to say things like that to. Put onto the door handle for a moment. Thank you, he said. And then he walked out before the thing happening in his chest could make it to his face, because it had been a very long time since anyone had seen him clearly enough to say something like that, and he was not entirely sure what to do with it. Back through Millhaven in the pale October sunlight, and didn't think about the call from Hillard County, or the gray sedan, or the name Dennis Farrow. About a 7-year-old girl who hated fractions and wanted a yellow dog and had put her arms around his leg in the rain and trusted him with the specific, except Ethan, absolute confidence of a child who had learned that trust was the most dangerous thing you could offer someone and had offered it anyway. And he thought about what it meant that someone like that had picked him. He buzzed in his pocket at a red light. He pulled it out. He answered it. Gray sedan, Petey said without preamble. Saw it parked on County Road 7 about 20 minutes ago. Engine off. Guy sitting in the driver's seat. Didn't match the description exactly, but the car's right and the plates are from Hillard County. Felt the cold settle in fast and precise. How far from Rose's, he said. Quiet for 2 seconds. 4 miles. Jax was already moving. Just didn't use the siren. He didn't have one. What he had was a road king that could move faster than most people expected, and 22 years of knowing exactly which roads cut through Millhaven without lights or stop signs to slow him down. Torres, while he rode, thumb on the phone, ear pressed to the speaker through the helmet, picked up on the second ring. County Road 7, Jack said. Sedan. Hillard County plates, driver sitting stationary. One of my people spotted it 20 minutes ago. 4 miles from Rosa Mendez's address. A beat of silence. It was moving. Jax could hear it. The shift in ambient sound. Chair. The door. Sure, I'm sure the car matches and the plates match the county. I'm not sure it's him, but I'm not willing to wait until I am sure. Approach Callahan. I mean it. I'm going to Rosa's. To the car. He ended the call before Torres could tell him not to do that either. He called Rosa next. She answered on the first ring, which meant she'd been listening for it, which meant Rosa already knew something was wrong. The way Rosa always knew some combination of instinct and paying attention that Jax had stopped trying to understand and simply relied on. The door, he said. Front and back. Don't answer it for anyone you don't recognize. Minutes out. Understood, Rosa said. No questions. Panic. Just Rosa, absorbing the situation and moving immediately to what it required. Her already walking. He of her shoes on the kitchen floor and his coat, and then Sophie's voice in the background saying something he couldn't make out. And then Rosa's voice back, steady and calm, saying something entirely different from what Jax had told her. Some version of it stripped of everything that would frighten a child. The throttle. He made it in 3 minutes. His door was locked. He knocked twice. In the pattern, she'd know 3 fast, 2 slow, and heard her footsteps cross the floor before the deadbolt turned. Opened the door and he came in, and she relocked it behind him without being told, and then looked at him the way Rosa looked at things that required assessment. Close, she asked. 4 miles. Could be nothing. Could be exactly what it looks like. Where's Torres? On his way to the car. Rosa nodded once and turned toward the living room. Emily, she said, in the same tone she might use to ask if someone wanted more coffee. Emily appeared. The doorway. She had the puzzle box in one hand from where she'd apparently been helping Sophie, and she looked at Jax's face and put the box down on the side table immediately. Here, she said. It wasn't a question. Possibly, Jax said. We don't know yet, but a car matching the description is parked 4 miles from this house, and I don't want to wait for confirmation before we're ready. His face did the thing it did. The rapid internal recalibration, the emotion processed and stored somewhere functional so the thinking could happen. The living room where Sophie was, and then back at Jax. You stay inside. Torres is on his way to the car. And he moves toward this address. Torres will have him before he gets close. Doesn't get there in time? Jax held her gaze. Here. It was said quietly, without posturing. Just a statement of physical fact, a large man in a locked house between a door and the people inside it. Really heard what was underneath it, and something in her posture shifted in a way that was almost imperceptible and entirely significant. He appeared around Emily's hip, one hand on her mother's arm, looking at Jax with those watchful eyes. Does everybody look serious? She said. Because adults are very boring, Jax said immediately. Talking about something that doesn't involve You. How's the puzzle? Sophie studied him for a second with the evaluative intensity of a child who knows deflection when she hears it, but isn't yet sure if this is the lying kind or the protecting kind. She decided, it's the animal one. There's a giraffe in the middle, and I can't find the neck pieces. Necks are long, he said. Lots of pieces. From the spots and work outward. She looked at him for another moment. She went back to the living room. Jax looked at Emily, watching him with an expression. He was beginning to recognize that careful, layered attention she gave to everything, peeling it back to see what was underneath. She knew something was wrong, Emily said, low enough that it wouldn't carry. Kids always know, and you distracted her. Tried to. Good at that, Emily said. Reading what people need. She said it as observation, not compliment, and somehow that made it land harder. He was never good at that. Dennis. He always knew exactly what people feared, but what they needed. She shook her head once. That was never his interest. It was the first time she'd offered anything about Pharaoh that wasn't pure logistics. Jax didn't push it. Did he always find you fast? He asked. Time you ran. Emily leaned against the wall. 3 days. I had Sophie in my sister's car. We drove 8 hours to my aunt's house in Greensboro, and he was there in 3 days. She looked at the floor. I'd done everything right. I'd left while he was at work. I used cash at every gas station. I didn't use my phone. A pause. My aunt from the front porch and told her if she didn't let him in, he'd call her landlord and report the renovation she'd done without a permit. About the renovation. He knew about everything. He spent the first 2 years of our marriage being charming and learning everything about everyone I cared about. She said it with a particular flatness of someone who has analyzed a thing so many times, it no longer surprises them, only exhausts them, so that he'd have it later, in case he needed it. Jax was quiet. You're thinking about the courthouse connection, Emily said. About what kind of person builds that kind of arsenal before they need it, he said. That means for how patient he's willing to be. Very patient, Emily said. I've had 14 months to understand exactly how patient. Buzzed. Torres. He stepped to the side and answered. Is registered to a rental company out of Hillard County, Torres said. These driver's a white male, 40s, gave ID that checks out to a Daniel Ferris. Oh, different name. Alias, Jack said. Possibly. Running the ID against the photo we have from the Hillard County Protective Order filing. Could take an hour. The driver consented to a conversation. Claims he's waiting for a friend. What does he look like? Described him. Jax relayed none of it to Emily, yet he turned slightly away, processing the description against what he knew. Jax said. Very, Torres said. That's not good. Agreed. A nervous man makes mistakes. A calm one has a plan. Another pause. I'm keeping a unit on him. If he moves, we follow. But Callahan, I cannot detain someone for sitting in a car. I know. I need something more before I can act. I know that too. He ended the call and turned back to Emily. Heard enough from his end to read the shape of it. He's using a fake name, she said. Possibly. They're checking. This has a backup, she said. He has 3 forms of ID that I know of. He had them before I even left. I found one in his desk when I was looking for the car insurance. She crossed her arms. Planned this before I ran, Jax. Whatever he told people, that I was unstable, that I was the problem, he was planning for the possibility that I'd figure out who he was and leave. He had contingencies. The word landed with its full weight. Not a man reacting to being left. A man who had anticipated being left and prepared accordingly. This to the court in Hillard County, Jax said. Them everything I'm telling you. The clerk who typed my statement looked at me the way people look at someone they've already decided is too emotional to be accurate. She said it without bitterness, which was somehow worse than bitterness. It was the voice of someone who has been disbelieved so many times that the disbelief has become a known landscape. All sat on the commission that appointed 2 of the 3 judges. That's not a conspiracy. That's just how small counties work. Fault. It's nobody's fault except the people who designed a system where that's allowed. Nobody's fault, Jack said, not loudly, just correcting the record. She looked at him. I know. I just got tired of being angry about it. Understood that kind of tired. The specific exhaustion of sustained anger that has nowhere useful to go. Buzzed again. Not Torres this time. A number he didn't immediately recognize, but the area code was Hillard County. He answered, Mr. Callahan. Male voice, middle-aged, careful. It's Marcus Webb. You had a mutual friend make an inquiry this morning. House contact. He'd gone through an intermediary to protect the man's job. Yes. What did you find? The access log on the protective order. Filing for Emily Baxter. A pause, and in the pause, Jax could hear the weight of what the man was about to say, the particular hesitation of someone delivering information they know will matter. That filing was accessed 14 times in a 13-month period. Access for a filing like that would be 2, maybe 3 times at most. Administrative pulls, court scheduling, that kind of thing. 14, Jack said. 14. 11 of those pulls came from one terminal. Assigned to a clerk in the family court division named Greta Farrow. The kitchen went very still. Emily was watching his face. Same name as the subject of the protective order, Jack said carefully. Marcus Webb said, she's worked in that office for 9 years. She has access to every filing that comes through family court. She pulled Emily Baxter's address record 11 times across 13 months. Recently, another pause. 6 days ago. 6 days ago. 3 days before Emily had spotted Farrow at the gas station. You, Jack said. I need you to do one more thing. You put that log into a document and send it to an official email, not mine. A law enforcement address I'm going to give you in a text within the hour. I can do, Marcus Webb said. That log is public record for authorized audit purposes. Sending it to a law enforcement address is completely above board. Man, he ended the call. Emily was still watching him. Had gone very still in the way she went still. When something important was arriving, not rigid but concentrated, every part of her attention narrowed to a point. Me, she said. He told her. Received it the way she received everything, without visible collapse, processing it somewhere internal, her face doing the quiet work of absorbing a betrayal that was not entirely surprising but was devastating anyway. Named Farrow. Family court. 11 access pulls on the one document that held her address every time she filed an update. And she said, yes, I met her once at a family dinner before everything. She stopped. She brought a casserole. The detail was so specific and so ordinary that it hung in the air between them with a particular cruelty. The log, Jack said. I'm sending it to Torres right now. That is not circumstantial. That is a documented pattern of access that directly correlates with every time he found you. Emily nodded. Her hands were very still at her sides. Emily. He waited until she looked at him. This changes what Torres can do. It's the piece he needed. She held his gaze. Will it be enough? B. Should. It will be enough, he said. Going to make sure of it. He texted Torres the Hillard County access log. Before he'd finished the sentence, with a message that laid out the correlation plainly. 11 dress pulls by a courthouse employee related to the subject of the restraining order. Recent 6 days prior to a confirmed sighting. He didn't editorialize. He didn't need to. Torres called back in 4 minutes. This is good, Torres said, and he sounded different, sharper. A person sounds when something clicks into place. Very good. I'm calling Hillard County now to verify the log. It holds, Jack said. If it holds, we have grounds to escalate to the state level. We're going to have something to put in front of a judge for a warrant on the alias ID. A pause. No match came back, by the way. Jax waited. The ID he gave us is fake. The photo matches Dennis Farrow from the Hillard County Protective Order. The man sitting in that car on County Road 7 is Dennis Farrow. Jax exhaled once, slow and controlled. Then you need to pick him up before he decides to move. I have a unit on him. The moment the warrant clears. Long. 20 minutes, maybe 30. He'll know something changed. Men like that, when they feel the situation shift, they act. This was quiet for a beat, I know. 20 minutes, Jack said. I'll push for 15. He ended the call and looked at Rosa, who had been standing in the kitchen doorway for the last several minutes, being entirely invisible while taking in everything. 15 minutes, he said. I'll make more coffee, Rosa said. Emily hadn't moved. She was standing against the wall with her arms crossed, and her face arranged into that composure that Jax now understood was not the absence of feeling, but the management of it, the deliberate choice, and over again across 14 months, to keep the fear inside where it couldn't be used against her. Out there, she said, yes, 4 miles, than that now, probably. But Torres has eyes on him, be pulling on his coat. She looked toward the living room. From where they stood, they could see Sophie on the floor with the puzzle, her small hands moving pieces around with focused concentration. The orange cat resettled beside her like he'd appointed himself her shadow. She doesn't know how close he's been, Emily said. Time. Every place we stopped. She knew we were running from something, but I never told her what. I just told her we were looking for the right place to land. It's the right call, Jack said. Was it? She turned to look at him directly. Because now I wonder if I should have. She stopped. No, she was 5 when I left. She's 7 now. What would I have said? There's a man who hurts people and he's your father and we're hiding because the courts couldn't fix it? What needed doing, Jack said. You kept her safe. That's the whole job. Emily held his gaze. You sound like someone who knows what the whole job is. Enough people do it wrong. I've watched enough people to understand when someone's doing it right. Quiet for a moment. Then, unexpectedly, do you have kids? But you wanted them. He looked at her. Sorry, she said immediately. None of my yes, he said. A long time ago. It doesn't happen. It didn't. He said it the same way she'd said things earlier. Fact. Processed, stored, no longer raw. Arranged itself differently. She nodded, accepting this. Don't be. Life arranged itself the way it arranged itself. He glanced towards Sophie. He said, whatever else is happening, she's good. You did that. Emily looked at her daughter for a long moment. To me about you this morning, she said. Before you got here, she asked if you were going to come back, or if you were just being polite. Did you tell her? I told her I thought you were going to come back. She paused. Wasn't sure I believed it, but I told her. You were right, he said. The record. I'm starting to notice that, she said. And it wasn't sarcasm. It was the careful, reluctant admission of someone revising an assessment they'd been holding firmly in the other direction. Minutes were the longest Jax had sat through since the night before at the Morrow Creek station. He stood near the front window without being obvious about it, watching the street. Produced coffee. Sophie finished the border of the puzzle and announced the giraffe neck pieces were definitely missing and possibly had been eaten by Perkins, which Perkins received with supreme indifference. At the 11-minute mark, his phone rang. Torres. He stepped into the hallway. We have him, Torres said. Came through 8 minutes ago. He didn't come easy. Started the engine when he saw us approach. My second unit was positioned at the end of the road. He had nowhere to go. A pause that contained something Jax couldn't immediately read. Calm, Callahan. Still completely calm. Identified himself with the fake ID before we got the door open, like he'd been rehearsing it. Jax said. He's asking for a specific attorney, based in Hillard County. Another pause. The attorney is on the county commission. He was. Torres, Jax said. That log from the courthouse that goes to the state level. Not Hillard. State. Already in motion. I made that call before I called you. Torres's voice carried something in it that Jax recognized the sound of a young deputy who had understood in the last hour exactly how the system had been working and exactly how angry that made him. Need Emily Baxter to come in and formally identify him and file an updated statement. She's ready, Jax said. He walked back into the kitchen and looked at Emily. They have him, he said. The words hit the air and hung there. Emily put both hands flat on the counter. She looked at them. Shoulders dropped approximately 1/4 of an inch, which in the context of how she'd been holding herself for the last hour was enormous. Sophie appeared in the doorway. She looked at her mother's face, then at Jax's face. She was 7 years old and she missed nothing. Did something good happen? She asked. Emily looked at her daughter for a long moment. Baby, she said. Something good happened. Sophie processed this with her characteristic gravity. Is that why you look like you might cry? Sometimes good things make you cry, Emily said. You've been waiting for them for a very long time. She thought about this. Then she came across the kitchen and put her hand on her mother's and looked up at Jack's. She said. A lot of people did it, Jack said. Marcus, your mom, for keeping that list. But you started it, Sophie said. He opened his mouth to redirect that, and Sophie shook her head. Started it, she said again, firmly. The tone of a 7-year-old who has made a determination and does not intend to be argued out of it. You stopped. Everything else came from that. He looked at this child, this small, serious, resilient child who had spent 2 years of her life in the back of a car or a motel room or a borrowed house learning to read danger and trust no one and keep her feelings manageable because her mother needed her to be manageable, and he felt moved through his chest that was close to grief and closer to something else, something that didn't have a name he was comfortable with. He said quietly. I started it. She nodded, satisfied, and turned back to the puzzle. The drive to the Millhaven substation took 15 minutes. So stayed with Sophie. Sophie had all fully, by this point, decided that Perkins was her personal responsibility and needed to be supervised. Perkins was enduring with visible skepticism. And Jax followed Emily's borrowed car in the Road King, keeping one eye on her taillights and one on the road behind them. But he followed. The substation was small. 3 deputy desks, a waiting area, a hallway that led back to 2 interview rooms, and a holding cell. He was waiting outside when they pulled up, and he looked different in the daylight than he had the night before. Solid somehow. Like what had happened in the last 12 hours had added something to him that the next 12 hours hadn't taken away yet. Emily's hand. He's in room 1, Torres said. You don't have to go near him. We have a camera set up. You can do the identification through the monitor in the hall. To see him, Emily said. Torres looked at her. Been running for 14 months, she said. See what he looks like when he's the one who can't walk away. She said it without anger, without triumph, as a fact about what she needed. Through the monitor is fine. I want to see him. Torres nodded. He set her up in the hallway with a monitor that showed the feed from interview room 1, and Jack stood beside her. Not touching, noble, not speaking, just there. On the monitor, Dennis Farrow sat at a table with his hands folded in front of him. He was average height, build, average, a face that was exactly as Emily had described, is completely ordinary. Have been a teacher, an accountant. The kind of man you stood behind in a grocery line and forgot before you reached your car. Looking at the camera with the patient, slightly bored expression of someone waiting for a delayed flight. Emily looked at him for a long moment. She didn't shake. She didn't look away. She stood in that hallway with her arms at her sides, and she looked at them who had been hunting her for 14 months, and she breathed slowly and steadily until something in her face settled from composure into something else, something that was past composure, something that was on the other side of it. She said, Dennis Farrow, my ex-husband. She paused. He looked smaller. Jax looked at the monitor. Farrow looked exactly the same size he'd looked a moment ago, but he understood what she meant. Things usually do, he said. When you stop running. She turned to look at Jax, moved through her expression, complicated, layered, not finished resolving. And then she squared her shoulders and looked at Torres. What do I sign? She said. It took 2 hours. The statement was thorough because Torres was thorough. In sad pot. And because Emily had 14 months of documented detail stored in her memory with the precision of someone who had understood. See, very early, that the details were going to matter eventually. Every date, every location, every violation, every time the charges had been reduced and who had reduced them, and what reason was given. Just typed and asked clarifying questions and typed some more. And Jax sat in the waiting area outside and drank machine coffee that tasted like warm regret. Petey texted to ask how things were moving, and Jax texted back 2 words, moving forward. He reflected. The most honest thing he could have said. Emily came out of the interview room. She looked tired in a different way than she'd looked tired all morning. It had been the exhaustion of sustained vigilance, the tiredness of a person who hadn't been able to put anything down for a very long time. Now it was something else. The tiredness of someone who had finally, after 14 months, set something heavy on the floor. She sat down in the waiting area chair across from Jack's and said nothing for a moment. "They're escalating to the state attorney's office," she said finally. House access log from Hillard County, Torres, says it's enough to pull in federal jurisdiction because the protective order violation crossed state lines. "It does," Jack said. He said federal involvement changes things significantly. She rubbed her eyes with the back of her hand. He said it in the careful way people say things when they're trying not to promise something they're not sure of. "He's being honest with you," Jack said. "That's what that sounds like." "I know." She dropped her hand and looked at him. "Jack's. What happens if it doesn't hold? If his attorney gets it reduced again, or if the federal piece falls apart, or if—" "Emily," she stopped. "One thing at a time," he said. "Today's thing. Today's he's in that room. In this lurk, you're in this chair. Murphy is at Rosa's house, arguing with a cat about puzzle jurisdiction. The rest is tomorrow." She looked at him for a long moment. "A very strange person," she said, not unkindly. "I've heard that. You're the leader of a motorcycle club with a skull on your vest, and you just spent 24 hours dismantling a domestic abuse situation with a courthouse access log and a contact named Marcus." She shook her head slightly. "What the vest suggests." "The vest is a vest," he said. "It doesn't know what I do." Something moved through her face, that thing he'd been catching glimpses of all morning, the thing that was the surviving outline of humor under 14 months of survival mode. She said, "I suppose it doesn't." Torres appeared in the hallway doorway. "It's Miss Baxter. We're going to hold Pharaoh overnight on the alias ID. Morning, the state attorney's office will be in contact. I'd like you to stay local if possible." "We'll stay," Emily said. He looked at her, then at Jax, then back at Emily. Something moved across his face that was too quick to read fully, but seemed to be appreciation of a situation he hadn't encountered in quite this configuration before. "We'll be in touch," he said, and went back down the hallway. Emily stood up. Jack stood with her. Out of the substation into the October afternoon, and the light was lower now, the sun having moved while they were inside, and the air had the particular clarity of a cold day, settling toward evening. He stood on the pavement for a moment and looked at the sky. Time he'd seen her do something, with no purpose, scanning the street, no calculating the nearest exit, no reading the environment for threats. Just standing, looking up at the afternoon. "It hasn't felt like this in a long time," she said. "Like the air is just air." She lowered her eyes. "Like it's not something I have to move through carefully." Already pulling on his coat. He stood beside her and said nothing, because some moments didn't need filling, and this was one of them. After a minute, she said, "Sophie's going to be upset about those missing giraffe puzzle pieces." "Not missing," Jack said. "Giraffe neck pieces look like background pieces, looking in the wrong section." Emily turned to look at him. "Do you know that?" "I've done a lot of puzzles in my life," he said. "Rosa has a thing for them. Every time you sit at her table for more than an hour, there's a puzzle." "You sit at her table for more than an hour often?" "Often enough," he said. "She feeds people. That's what she does. Sit down, and suddenly there's food and a puzzle, and she's asking you things she has no business asking. And somehow you've told her everything." And Emily smiled. It was real this time, not the shadow of one, not the outline of one. It was bread, but an actual, present smile. Brief and slightly crooked and completely unmanaged. "She asked me about Sophie's father this morning," Emily said. Before coffee. "That's Rosa," Jack said. "Fine," Emily said. "She is," he agreed. "So the most reliably safe person I've ever known." Emily looked at him. "Like you," she said. He didn't answer that. "It's not a question," she said. She stopped. "I'm saying I see it, that's all. I see what you are. You thought was hiding it. It isn't." The afternoon light was very still around them. Thought about what he wanted to say and understood, with the particular clarity that certain moments should produce, that what he wanted to say and what this moment required were the same thing. Come on, he said. Sophie's been with that cat long enough. Dickens has a limit. Emily laughed. A short, surprised sound, the laugh of someone who'd forgotten they could. She pressed her hand over her mouth, not from embarrassment, but from the shock of it, the physical surprise of her own laughter after what this day had been. Then she dropped her hand and let it be. They walked to their respective vehicles, and Jax waited until Emily pulled out before he started the Road King. Her feet behind her bumper the whole way, back to Rosa's, not because she needed it. 14 months of being hunted didn't just stop feeling that way the moment the hunter sat down in an interview room, and he understood that, and he wasn't going anywhere. Rosa's porch light was on. If he saw them from the window, he could see her small face in the glass, and she was gone from the window. Before they reached the door, the way children move when they've been waiting and have finally run out of patience for waiting, opened before Emily's hand touched the knob. Sophie came through it at full speed and hit her mother square in the midsection, both arms around her, face pressed into Emily's coat. Caught her, absorbed her, held her. Her daughter's head. Emily looked at Jax with wet eyes and a face that was no longer composed, managed, no longer the controlled surface of a woman who had learned to keep everything inside where it couldn't be used against her. At him with the face of someone who has put something down after a very long time of carrying it and doesn't quite know yet what to do with their empty hands. He gave her the only thing that moment needed. He looked back, steady and present and not going anywhere. Sophie lifted her face from her mother's coat and looked at Jax over Emily's shoulder. The giraffe neck pieces, she said. Where are they? Background section, he said. Look for pieces that look like they belong in the sky. Back from Emily with the speed of a child who has important business to attend to, and disappeared back into the house. Rosa appeared in the doorway with Perkins under one arm and a look on her face that was entirely too knowing for a woman who claimed to be completely ordinary. Inside, she said, both of you, I made soup. And Jax Callahan, who had ridden through a storm to end up at an abandoned gas station on a county road morning and had stopped because a child cried, and he was a person who stopped, walked through Rosa's door and sat down at her table while the October evening came down. Outside, and for the first time in a day that had contained about 14 years worth of things, he let himself be still. Rosa's soup was chicken and white bean, and she served it in bowls that were slightly too large, the way she served everything generously, asking if you wanted that much. Osher deponents this coat, operating that people generally needed more than they thought they did, and it was her job to provide accordingly. Ate 2 full bowls and half a piece of cornbread, and then fell asleep at the table with her head on her folded arms before anyone noticed she was fading. Pulling on. Emily caught her before she slid sideways, lifted her with the practiced ease of a mother who had been carrying this particular child for 7 years, and carried her to the spare room without waking her. For 4 minutes. When she came back, she sat down at Rosa's table and put both hands around the coffee, and put both hands had already poured, and she didn't speak for a moment, and nobody required her to. "It's out," Emily said finally. "Good," Rosa said. "That child has been operating on fumes and adrenaline for 2 years. Her body knows when it's safe to stop." Emily looked at her coffee. "Does it know when it's safe? Bodies are smarter than we give them credit for," Rosa said. "The ones who override them. She hasn't learned to do that yet." She paused. "A gift, not a problem." Jax was at the end of the table, coffee in front of him. Watching Emily process this the way she processed everything quietly, without visible performance, putting it over until she knew what it was. "Hard last night, too," Emily said. "First time in weeks she didn't wake up twice. She looked up. Of this house. Because of you." She meant Rosa, but she looked at Jax too. Included him without being directed at him. And the grit, which felt more accurate than the directed version would have. "Because you stopped moving," Jax said. "Not because of the house. You made it stop." Emily shook her head slightly. We made it stop. He didn't argue it. He stood. Rosa stood, began clearing the bowls with the efficient, unobtrusive movement of someone who had spent decades making other people comfortable and understood that the best way to do it was to be invisible about the work. Was at the sink when Jax's phone vibrated on the table. Torres. He answered and put it on speaker low enough that it was private between him and Emily across the table. "Oh, is booked," Torres said. "Formal charges filed tonight, violation of an out-of-state protective order, use of false identification to evade law enforcement, interstate stalking under federal statute. State Attorney's Office called me an hour ago. Sending someone down tomorrow morning." Emily's hands tightened on the mug. "County courthouse situation," Torres continued. "The access log went up the chain fast. Apparently your contact in Hillard County sent it to 3 addresses, ECs simultaneously the state attorney, the county oversight board, and a reporter at the state paper." A pause that contained something between admiration and professional alarm. "It's not what I asked for, but it's going to be very difficult for anyone to make the log disappear now." Jax thought about Marcus Webb, who had spent 9 years watching the Farrow family's reach extend through Hillard County like groundwater through foundation cracks, and who had apparently decided that a single email to law enforcement was not going to be sufficient coverage. "Man," Jax said. "Complicated man," Torres said. "But yes." Another pause. "Ms. Baxter, I want to be honest with you about what comes next, because I think you've had enough of people managing what they tell you." Emily leaned slightly toward the phone. "Tell me." "The charges are real, and they're solid. The federal piece on interstate stalking is the strongest because it removes the case from Hillard County jurisdiction entirely, which removes the local entanglement. Has already contacted that attorney, and that attorney has already contacted the state bar, the state bar about Torres County procedures, which tells me he's looking for procedural grounds to challenge the arrest." "He has a move," Emily said quietly. "He's going to have a harder time making it this time," Torres said. "House log doesn't go away. His cousin's access record is in 3 inboxes and 1 news desk. Whatever he does in that interview room, the pattern is documented." A pause. "He knew this because I want you to sleep tonight, because everything is resolved." "It isn't. But the ground is different than it was yesterday." Emily exhaled. "Thank you, Torres, for being straight with me." "Yes, ma'am." He sounded like the directness had cost him something small, and he was glad to have paid it. "So call you in the morning." The call ended. Rosa turned from the sink without saying anything about what she'd clearly heard, and refilled both their coffees and went back to the sink. "The ground is different," Emily repeated, herself or to Jax, to neither of them specifically. "It is," Jax said. "I keep waiting for the other shoe." 13 months of experience," he said. "It doesn't turn off in a day." As is right. The log changes the weight of what they can do. "That's real." She looked at him across the table. "Can I ask you something?" "Yes." "Does any of this, the courthouse contact, log being sent to 3 places at once, PD circulating the car description, all of it. Why does any of that happen because of you? A motorcycle club president. You rode a gas station parking lot in the rain. How does that turn into..." She gestured. A small economical movement that contained the whole of the last 24 hours. Jax was quiet for a moment, because when I decided what kind of club this was going to be, a long time ago, I decided the point of having resources, and connections, and people who answer your call at midnight is that you use them for this. He said it simply. Anything else for this. So when this shows up in a parking lot, everything else is already in place. Emily studied him. Most people don't think that way. They aren't in a position. Most people aren't in a decide what the power is for, he said. I was, so I decided. Rosa made a sound from the sink that was not quite a word, but communicated something like exactly right with extreme efficiency. Emily looked at Rosa's back, then at Jax, then at her coffee. My sister called, she said. While you were talking to Torres, I didn't answer. Jax waited. She's the one who knew every location, Emily said. One Rosa put on the list. And I know the log shows it was the cousin at the courthouse, not my sister. I know that, but she stopped. She knew too much. Knew exactly where we were going next. And there were 3 times he showed up within 48 hours of me calling her. She said it carefully, like a person reciting a list they've been compiling in their head for months and finally saying out loud. Have to decide about your sister tonight, Rosa said, from the sink. I know, Emily said. I'm not deciding, she paused. I'm saying it to real people instead of inside my head. That's different from deciding, Rosa agreed. That's just getting it out where it can breathe. Emily nodded. Then she looked at Jax again. The club. The other men. Do they know about us? Petey and Bull know the outline. Just know there's a situation and to keep their eyes open. B knows more than they need to. They don't think it's... She seemed to be selecting the word carefully. Unusual. Their president spending 2 days on a domestic situation involving strangers. Asked me one question this morning, Jack said. How old Sophie was. When I told him 7, he picked up his phone and started making calls. His version of a full explanation. Emily looked at him for a long moment. Built something real, she said. Out of something most people write off before they look at it. A long time, he said, and a lot of wrong turns. Real things do. See, Rosa said on around so with the infuriating accuracy of a woman who contributed the exact right thing at the exact right moment and knew it. Emily finished her coffee. She looked like the day was settling on her the way heavy things settle, not crushing, but present, making itself felt in her shoulders and the set of her eyes. I should sleep, she said. While Sophie is. Spare room's ready, Rosa said. Blanket in the closet. It's the blue one. Don't use the green one. It sheds. Emily stood. She picked up her mug and carried it to the sink, and Rosa took it from her. And that small exchange, the instinct to help, the easy acceptance happened as naturally as if they'd known each other for years. At the kitchen doorway and looked back at Jax. Oh, she said. The state attorney, all of it. I'll be here, he said. She nodded. And then Jax. You said earlier about deciding what the power is for. He waited. I spent 2 years feeling like I had no power, like I was just reacting to whatever he did next. She held the doorframe. Tonight is the first time in 2 years that I feel like something happened because of a decision I made. Not a decision I made running away. A decision I made moving towards something. Her gaze. That's yours, he said. That happened because you made that list. You remembered those dates. You stayed in that interview room for 2 hours and gave Torres everything he needed. It's not me. That's you. She looked at him for one long moment. She went down the hall and he heard the soft sound of the spare room door closing. And then Rosa's kitchen was very quiet. She dried her hands. Rosa dried her hands and turned around with the expression she wore when she was about to say something she had been waiting to say for a while. He said, I haven't said anything. I can hear you thinking it. I'm an old woman, Rosa said. I think loudly. You'll have to be more specific. He looked at her. She's been through a significant thing, he said. She needs exactly what she's getting, Rosa said. Is people who show up. You have always been a person who shows up. I'm not editorializing. I'm just noting that the combination of her needing someone who shows up and you being someone who shows up is not something I manufactured, Jax. In a parking lot in the rain before I was involved. He picked up his coffee mug and found it empty and put it back down. Home, Rosa said, not unkindly. Sleep. Come back tomorrow and deal with the state attorney and whatever else Torres brings. One day at a time. He went home. He did, in fact, sleep not well. Too long. Enough. He was back at Rosa's by 8 the next morning. With a paper bag from the diner on 5th that contained 4 breakfast sandwiches and a cup of coffee for himself, because Rosa's coffee, while excellent, was never fast enough in the morning. He was already up. She was at the kitchen table with a bowl of cereal and a book, which she put down immediately when she saw him. The giraffe neck, she said. You were right. It was in the background section. Just it last night after you left. Good, he said. You should have stayed and helped, she said in the tone of a child making a fair point. Help with the next one. She considered this. Rosa has one with birds. I don't like birds as much as giraffes, but I think we should do it. Rosa, that. I already did. She said yes. Sophie picked up her spoon. My mom cried last night. Listen, she said, matter-of-factly, not looking up from her cereal. After she thought I was asleep, I heard her. Jack set the paper bag down on the counter and sat across from her, kind of crying. Sophie looked up. The kind where you try to be quiet so nobody knows. Not the scared kind. She considered the distinction carefully. The other kind. That's a different thing, he said. Kind that needs to come out. I know, she said. I didn't go in. I thought she needed to do it by herself. On the rope's case, he looked at this child across the table, this 7-year-old, who had learned to distinguish between the crying that needed company and the crying that needed solitude. He had learned this not from being taught, but from living in close proximity to someone she loved, who was carrying more than any person should carry, and who had quietly, being asked. He made the correct call. Pretty wise, he said. I'm 7, she said. That's not a counter-argument. She went back to her cereal, apparently satisfied. Attorney's representative arrived at Torres's substation at 9:30. Her name was Sandra Yee. Be something. Compact. Case she handled like a weapon, and the focused efficiency of someone who had driven 2 hours from the state capitol before most people had finished their first cup of coffee and was not interested in small talk. She shook Emily's hand, and then Jax's, and when she looked at the vest, she didn't pause on it, which he registered as either professionalism or indifference, and decided was probably both. House access log, she said, before anyone had sat down. I've had my office running analysis on it since 11 last night. The pattern is unambiguous. She opened the briefcase and produced 3 printed sheets. 11 access pulls on a single protective order filing. From the same terminal, the same clerk ID, spanning 13 months, on collates within a 72-hour window of every confirmed sighting of Dennis Farrow near Emily Baxter's location in 11 of the 14 months in question. Emily took the sheets and looked at them. Her face was still reading. Farrow has been employed by Hillard County Family Court for 9 years, Sandra Yee continued. Full access to all protective order filings and associated address records. She may not have involved handing a physical document to her cousin. It may have been as simple as a phone call saying, I saw a filing come through today. Proving intent versus proving access is the difference between a criminal charge and a civil action, but she paused to let that land. The access record alone, combined with the documented violations, is enough to support the federal stalking case independent of any cooperation from Hillard County. Don't need Greta Farrow, convicted, to put Dennis Farrow away. Long, Emily said, conservatively. Given the interstate element and the documented pattern, 18 to 36 months on the federal charge alone, assuming no plea. Already pulling on his coat, Farrow's attorney already approached my office this morning about a plea arrangement. She said it with a flatness that implied she had not found this surprising. What does he want? Emily said. Reduced charges in exchange for a full confession and an agreement not to contest the protective order going permanent. Sandra Yee looked at her directly. Recommendation is that you do not accept less than a felony conviction and the permanent order. Reduced charge gets him out faster. The permanent order is enforceable anywhere in the country. Only on his record limits where he can work, where he can live, and significantly changes what happens if he violates the order again. Emily absorbed this. Then she said he'll take that deal. On indicated this morning that he would consider it. Sandra Yee's expression suggested she had heard that phrase from defense attorneys before and knew exactly what weight to give it. Like Ethan, that a reduced sentence gives him more options later. Job is to make sure those options are as limited as possible. Then don't let him take less than the felony, Emily said. Yee looked at her for a moment with something that might have been professional respect, taking up a small amount of space in an otherwise businesslike expression. That is my intention. The meeting ran an hour and 20 minutes. Emily answered questions with the precision and completeness that Jax had come to understand was simply how she thought, not performance, not preparation, just the way her mind organized itself when the information mattered. Yi took notes and asked follow-up questions that were fast and specific and never once condescending. When it was over, just walked them out, and Sandra Yi got into her state vehicle and drove back toward the Capitol, and Emily stood on the pavement in the October morning and let out a long, slow breath. "Ernie," she said. "If the plea holds," Jack said. "If it doesn't," she said. "Even if it goes to trial, the log is public now. Her from the state paper called me this morning." I didn't answer, but she looked at Jack's. "It's out there. Whatever happens in the courtroom, the story is out there." "Yes," he said. She looked at him. "You knew that when Marcus Webb sent it to 3 places." "I thought it was wise," he said. "You thought it was necessary," she corrected. He didn't argue that either. 3 weeks passed. The felony plea came through on a Tuesday in November, 17 days after Farrow's arrest. Yi called Emily directly and read her the terms, and Emily sat at Rose's kitchen table. She and Sophie were still at Rose's, the motel in Granville having been abandoned without regret. And she said yes to the felony, yes to the permanent protective order, and thank you in a voice that was steady all the way through. She came off the phone and looked at Rosa and Jax, both at the table because it was Tuesday, and Jax had taken to stopping by on Tuesdays, the way you take to things that start as temporary arrangements and gradually reveal themselves as something else. And she said. Rosa put down her mug. Jax looked at Emily. She appeared in the doorway with a piece of paper. In her hand, she'd been drawing at the living room table, which was her current primary occupation when she wasn't doing puzzles or reorganizing Rosa's bookshelf by color. Project that Rosa had permitted with the patient acceptance of someone who had decided it cost her nothing and pleased the child enormously. "Done," Sophie said. Emily looked at her daughter. I'd been thinking about this moment, how to explain it, what words to use, how much a 7-year-old needed, and how much was too much. He was already pulling on his coat. She'd been turning it over for 3 weeks, running the conversation in her head, selecting and discarding different versions of it. She said was, the man we were hiding from. He can't follow us anymore. Official. Legal. Permanent. Sophie looked at her with those dark, steady eyes. "We don't have to run," she said. "We don't have to run." Sophie thought about this for a moment. Then she held up the piece of paper she'd been carrying. It was a drawing, crayon, the specific and confident lines of a child who draws without self-consciousness, a dog shape that was unambiguously yellow. "Can we get the dog now?" she said. Emily made a sound that was half laugh and half something that had been waiting much longer than a laugh to come out, and she crossed the kitchen and pulled Sophie against her and held her. Sophie let herself be held with the particular tolerance of a child who has decided acceptable for approximately 45 seconds before there is dog business to discuss. "We'll talk about the dog," Emily said into Sophie's hair. "Means yes," Sophie said, muffled against Emily's shoulder. In voice as when you said we'd talk about getting a library card and then we got one. Jax made a sound that could generously be described as a cough. Rosa's expression suggested she was enjoying this very much and had no intention of being subtle about it. The next day, Emily found an apartment. So, not through Rosa or anyone, Jax knew she found it herself. On a listing site, a 2-bedroom on the north end of Millhaven, of a building with a parking lot town chic could see from the window, and a landlord who, when she explained her situation in the careful shorthand she developed for such conversations, and said, "Ma'am, your daughter left a situation like that 6 years ago. Is yours if you want it." She called Jax to tell him. "In Millhaven," he said. "I did," she said, and didn't add anything to that. This was itself a kind of addition. He said, and he didn't add anything to that either. Moving in took 2 hours, and the help of Bull arrived with his truck without being specifically asked. Jax had mentioned it in passing, and Bull had said nothing and shown up at 8 in the morning with the truck, and 2 members of the chapter who moved furniture with the efficient competence of men who had spent their lives moving things that were heavy. First, P. Sophie supervised. She stood in the middle of the new living room and told them where everything went with the absolute authority of a child who had not had a room of her own in 2 years and had opinions about how a space should function that she bring up and was now prepared to deploy. who was 6'4" and had the actual expression of someone who took direction from 7-year-olds seriously, the bookshelf twice at her instruction and said each time, "Better?" And each time Sophie said, "A little more." And each time Bull moved it without complaint. Emily watched this from the kitchen doorway and said nothing, but her face was doing the thing it had been doing more frequently over the past 3 weeks, the thing that was not quite composed and not quite unguarded, somewhere in the honest middle ground, where what she felt was actually visible without being performed. Furniture was placed and the boxes were in their rooms, and Bull's crew had filed out with the easy naturalness of men who knew when a job was done and didn't need to be thanked elaborately. Jack stood in Emily's new kitchen, east while she made coffee in a coffee maker that was technically Rosa's, loaned in indefinitely in the way Rosa loaned things. "It," Emily said. "Is that good or bad?" "Good," she said immediately. "Very good." I'd forgotten what good quiet sounded like. She handed him a mug. "I start at the school on Monday." He looked at her, pulling on his coat. She'd mentioned the job search in passing, the way she mentioned things she wasn't ready to make a bigger deal of a part-time position in the administration office at Sophie's new school, which had opened up through a connection Rosa had made with her typical invisible efficiency. He said, "I'm nervous," she said. "I know." "I haven't worked in." She stopped. "He made it difficult for me to work. Hall, wherever I was working. Show up. After the second job, I stopped trying because it wasn't." She held the mug. "Isn't worth what it cost." "This one is different," Jack said. "Because he can't come." "Because he can't come," he confirmed. Around the kitchen, her kitchen, cabinets, her cabinet window, with the parking lot she could see from it, her coffee maker that was technically Rosa's. Specific and unremarkable territory of a life that was hers. "To thank you," she said, "properly." Not just she stopped, not just in passing. "You don't need to." "I know I don't need to," she said. "Want to." "There's a difference." She turned to look at him directly. "You stopped in a parking lot in the rain at 11 o'clock at night. You stopped and you stayed. And then you didn't stop staying." She held his gaze. "He has not stopped staying in a long time, Jax. You should know that." He was quiet. "I'm not." She shook her head slightly. "I'm not saying this to make things complicated. I'm saying it because it's true. And I think you deserve to hear true things," said plainly. Leday pulling on his coat. This woman, who had walked into the dark on purpose to draw danger away from her daughter, made a list of 11 names without flinching. Poor Ace stood in a courthouse hallway and watched her ex-husband on a monitor and said he looked smaller. Had found her own apartment and gotten her own job and drawn the line between gratitude and dependence, with the precise, clear instinct of someone who had lost herself once and knew exactly what it had cost. "To be fine," he said. "I know," she said. "I've been fine before. I'll be fine again. That's not the thing." She paused. "Fine is not the same as good. I was fine before he came along. Surviving for 14 months. What I'm talking about is whether it's possible to get to good again." She looked at him steadily. "I think it might be. That's what I wanted to say. That I think it might be. And that has something to do with you." The kitchen was very quiet. From Sophie's room came the sound of boxes being opened with intense personal purpose. Jack set his coffee mug down. "I'm going to teach Sophie to ride a bicycle on Saturday," he said. "Mentioned she doesn't know how." Rosa mentioned she doesn't know how. "I thought the parking lot at the old Riverside Community Center would work. It's flat and there's no traffic on weekends." Emily looked at him. "If that's all right with you," he said. His gaze for one long moment. "Saturday," she said. "Moss, yes." The word sat between them and meant several things at once, the way words do when they've been selected carefully by two people who are both paying close attention. "On Saturday," he confirmed, with her arms full of in the doorway, with her arms full of stuffed animals that needed to be organized in a specific order she had already decided on and required input about him. "I need help with the shelf," she announced. "I'll be right there," Emily said. She looked at Jax, then at her mother, then back at Jax with the evaluating look he now understood. She would probably never stop giving him, because that was simply who she was. Careful, watchful, verifying the thing in front of her against what she already knew. "You staying for dinner?" she said. He looked at Emily. Emily looked at Sophie with the expression of a mother, watching her daughter ask the question the mother was also thinking about and cannot quite ask. Cooking, Jack said to Sophie. Sophie's face did something complicated. I'm 7, she said. Then what are you offering? Thought about this with complete seriousness. I can set the table, she said, and I know where Rosa's good placemats are. Old deal, Jack said. Sophie turned and went back to her room with the stuffed animals and the absolute confidence of a child who has concluded a negotiation successfully. Her steps were solid, certain on the new floor. Her floor, her apartment, room, and the sound of them. And sure, and moving towards something rather than away from it. Over the kitchen, like the first quiet after a very long storm. Emily looked at Jax. For a moment, she didn't say anything, and he didn't say anything. And outside the window, the October afternoon was doing what October afternoons do in the part of the country where the leaves finally let go, turning everything the color of something ending, which is also paying attention. The color of something getting ready to begin. You, she said, quietly, for the last time, the way you say something, when you've said it enough times and it's been received enough times that it can finally settle into the past where it belongs and become simply part of the history between two people. For dinner, he said. Don't thank me. She smiled. Slightly, the real one, the slightly crooked one, the one that had nothing managed about it. She said. And she went to help Sophie with the shelf. 5. Family he never expected. Saturday came in cold and bright, the kind of October morning that had no patience for hesitation, the lights sharp, the air direct, everything asking you to decide whether you were in or out. Axe arrived at Emily's apartment at 9, with a bicycle he'd found at the chapter's storage unit, one of 6, that the club kept for the annual kids' ride they organized every spring. It was blue, the slightly scuffed training wheels that he'd already removed because Sophie had told him the night before, with considerable firmness, green wheels were for babies, and she was not a baby. Removed them without comment. He knocked. Emily opened the door before the second knock, which told him she'd heard the road king from the street, which meant she'd been listening for. He filed away somewhere quiet. It's been ready since 7:30, Emily said, stepping back to let him in. I said 9. She heard 9 and processed it as 7:30. Emily looked somewhere between exasperated and something warmer. She's had her jacket on since 8. Sophie appeared from the hallway in her jacket. Her helmet, Rosa, had produced it from somewhere. Rosa produced things without explanation or fanfare and an expression of absolute operational readiness. At the bicycle, she looked at Jax. You took the training wheels off, she said. Me too. I know. She studied the bicycle with the focused attention she brought to all important things. Wanted to make sure you listened. I always listen, he said. She looked up at him, the evaluating look, quick and certain. Then she walked past him toward the door. Let's go. Emily caught Jax's eye over Sophie's head. Something moved through her face that was quiet and complete. The expression of a woman watching something she hadn't known she was going to get and hadn't yet decided how large to let herself feel it. He held the door. The community center parking lot was empty at 9 on a Saturday, which was what he'd counted on. It was wide and flat and forgiving, and the morning light lay across it in long, clean angles. Stood beside the bicycle and sized it up, the way fighters size up opponents, not with fear, but with honest assessment. How do I start, she said. Sit on it first. Get the feel of the weight. She did. Both feet on the ground and gripped the handlebars and sat very straight. This was the instinct of someone who thought upright posture would help. Would not, which it would not, but it was not the moment to say so. What? Now you push off with one foot and balance. Pedal yet, just coast. She pushed off. She lasted approximately 2 seconds before the bicycle tilted left and her foot hit the ground. At the asphalt where her foot had landed. Then axe. That was bad. That was first try, he said. Try again. She tried again. 3 seconds. This time before the correction. Emily was standing at the edge of the lot with her coffee, watching. And she had the expression of a person very carefully not interfering with a process that was going correctly without her. On the sixth try, coasted for a full 7 seconds. It was the bicycle wobbling but upright, her jaw set, her eyes forward, making the 100 tiny unconscious adjustments that are the actual mechanism of balance, in which nobody can teach because they can only be discovered. Her foot down at the end and looked at Jax. I almost had it, she said. You did have it. You had 7 seconds. Seconds isn't having it. 7 seconds is the beginning of having it, he said. Is the same thing, just earlier. She considered this. First off again. By the 11th try, she was pedaling. Not fast, not with any particular confidence, returning under her own power. And she was staying up, and her face had shifted from focused determination into something beyond it, the expression of a child discovering that a thing they could not do ago is now, improbably, a thing they can do. Rode in a long, wobbly arc across the parking lot and dragged her foot to stop and turned around and looked at Jax from 30 feet away. I did it, she said. You did it, he said. She looked at her mother. Emily had one hand pressed flat against her sternum, the coffee forgotten at her side, and was the coffee forgotten so wide it looked like it might be the first time those specific muscles had worked that hard in a long time. I saw, she called. Sophie turned the bicycle around with the careful maneuvering of someone who has not yet mastered the turn, but is not going to let that stop her, and rode back. She was faster this time, less wobble. The body learning in real time, storing the lesson, applying it immediately. She stopped in front of Jax. Again, she said. He laughed before he could manage it real, uncomplicated. The laugh of a man who had forgotten for a while that this kind of thing was available to him. He looked at the laugh with slight suspicion as if cataloging it for future reference. Then she pushed off and rode away. They were there for 2 hours. By the time they left, Sophie could ride in a straight line without significant wobble, could stop without dragging her foot, and had twice attempted a turn with partial success. She was not yet good at it. She was, however, entirely committed to becoming good at it, had learned over 44 years, was the more important of the two conditions. Back to the apartment, rode the bicycle on the sidewalk slowly, and carefully, with Jax walking one step to her left and Emily walking one step to her right, and she held herself with the precise, concentrated pride of someone who has earned something through effort rather than having it given. Jax, she said, navigating a crack in the sidewalk with serious attention. He was mid-step. He finished it. Then he said, what? Can we do this again next Saturday? He looked at Emily over Sophie's helmet. Emily was looking at him with the careful, steady attention that was simply how she looked at things that mattered. Leaf on, his coat. And there was something in it that was a question, without being a question, the same quality the word Saturday had carried in her kitchen, the quality of a word doing more than its dictionary work. Saturday, he said. Yes. Sophie nodded, satisfied. Good. A pause while she navigated another sidewalk irregularity. Going to be really fast by then. You're already faster than you were an hour ago, he said. Going to be faster than that, she said. Significantly faster. First, argued. The feast, the weeks that followed arranged themselves with the particular logic of things that are finding their natural shape, not forced, not planned to the detail, just moving the way water moves when it finds a channel that fits. Jax came on Saturdays for the bicycle. He came on Tuesdays because he always had, and there was no reason to stop. On the occasional weeknight, when Emily called, not often, she was careful about that, in a way that told him she was paying attention to the line between someone and leaning on them to talk through something the state attorney had raised. A conversation she'd had with Torres about the Hillard County situation, or nothing in particular. Just two people who had started talking in a parking lot in the rain and had not run out of things to say. Emily started at the school on a Monday in November and came home that evening and called Jax and said that I'm good at things. And he could hear in her voice that this was not a boast, but a genuine, slightly startled discovery. You rediscover a room in a house you've been locked out of for 2 years. I know, he said. You couldn't have known, she said. You met me when I was running. People who run for 2 years and keep their child safe and their head clear and their documentation complete, he said, are people who are good at things. I could tell. A pause. That's a very specific thing to have noticed. I pay attention, he said. Another pause, quieter. I know you do, she said. Sophie's school held a fall celebration in late November, the kind of event that required parents and siblings and anyone else the child considered essential, which Sophie communicated to Jax via a handwritten note she gave him on a Tuesday, written in the precise, slightly oversized handwriting of a second grader that said, "The celebration is November 22. You should come. There will be food." Sophie. Beneath her name she had drawn what appeared to be a yellow dog. He came. He sat in a metal folding chair in a school gymnasium between Emily and Rosa. He'd also been invited. Tis via handwritten note. And he watched Sophie perform a 3-minute dramatic reading about the history of corn that she delivered with the absolute conviction of someone who considered the history of corn genuinely important. And he felt something in his chest that he recognized after a moment as the specific sensation of being exactly where you are supposed to be, which was not a sensation he had a great deal of prior experience with. After the performance, Sophie found them in the crowd with the accuracy of a child who knew exactly where her people were. She stood in front of Jax and looked up at him. "Did you see me?" she said. "You," he said. "Was I good? You were the best one." At him with evaluating look. "You're supposed to say that." "I say what I mean," he said. She studied him for another second. Then, "I know." And she turned to Rosa and began explaining, in comprehensive detail, what she had learned about corn. Emily stood beside Jax in the gymnasium noise, watching her daughter talk to Rosa with the fluent ease of a child who had found her people and knew it. You know, Emily said, not quietly, not dramatically, just saying a true thing. He watched Sophie gesturing about corn. "I know," he said. "It's not a small thing," Emily said. Her. She paused, finding the precise words. Doesn't love people casually. She's careful about it. He pulling on his coat, since she was old enough to understand that some people leave. "I'm not leaving," he said. He said it the way. He said things that were simply true, without embellishment, without the weight of a declaration, just the statement of a fact that he had already incorporated into how he understood his own life. Emily looked at him. "I know that now," she said. "I want you to know I know it, because it took me a while, and you were patient about it while I was figuring it out, and you should know it registered." Looked back at her. He looked at her. "It registered," she said again, quietly, and looked away towards Sophie. And the conversation moved on the way conversations do, between people who have said the important thing and are comfortable letting it settle without pushing it further. Arrive the way it does in that part of the country, assertively. All at once, the temperature dropping in a single overnight shift as if autumn had simply agreed to step aside. It was in December that the thing happened that none of them had anticipated, that arrived not like a crisis, but like a reckoning. The kind that comes after the immediate danger has passed and the adrenaline is gone. And the adrenaline is standing in the quiet with everything the emergency kept you from having to feel. Emily called him. On a Wednesday night. Not her usual voice, not the measured, organized Emily who processed things before she spoke. It was indifferent, something that he recognized in the first 3 words. "Can you come?" she said. He was there in 12 minutes. Opened the door, and she was not crying, which was almost worse than if she had been. Except Ethan. She was standing in her kitchen with both hands flat on the counter, her face arranged into that control that he now knew was the last line, the thing she kept up when everything else had come down. "She's asleep," she said. "She's fine. This is me." Her. "Okay," he said. "My sister called tonight. We talked for an hour." She stopped. Then she didn't know Jax. She went back through everything. Every time I told her where we were. Every time she might have said something to someone without realizing. And she found it. She pressed her hands harder on the counter. She had a friend, a woman she'd gone to school with in Hillard County. She'd mentioned to this woman, twice casually, just talking, that her sister was getting settled somewhere new. She didn't say where. But the woman's husband worked for Dennis's uncle. He said nothing. Let her have the telling of it. She didn't know, Emily said again. And Feej see Feethan. She trusted someone the way you trust people you went to school with, people who seem safe. And that person was connected to the wrong network without anyone knowing. She looked up at him. My sister has been carrying guilt for 14 months thinking she might have led him to us. She wasn't even wrong. She just wasn't doing it on purpose. Of that settled in the kitchen between them. 14 months. Not telling me she was afraid she was the leak, Emily said, because she didn't want to make things worse. 14 months to call her too often, because I was afraid she was the leak. And for Buffet, she stopped. Her voice had the quality of something that had been held too tightly for too long and was now finally putting pressure on the container. Ian coat. We missed each other for 14 months because of something neither of us did. To the kitchen table and pulled out a chair. Down, he said. She sat. He sat across from her. Back, he said. Emily looked at him. Tonight, he said. Her back and tell her what you just told me. That she didn't know. That you didn't know. That you missed each other. He held her gaze. Don't let the thing that already cost you 14 months cost you anything else. Emily was very still. Then she picked up her phone. She called her sister back, and she said the things that needed saying, and Jack sat at the kitchen table and drank the coffee he'd made himself from Emily's machine, and didn't listen to words. The stoss, just the cadence, the initial brittleness of two people who hadn't said the real things in too long. And then the slow, unmistakable shift into something that was still raw, but was also real. Reunions actually sound, which is nothing like how we imagined them in advance. On the phone for 40 minutes. When she came back to the table, her eyes were red, and her shoulders were down in the way they hadn't been when he arrived. For Christmas, Emily said. Good, he said. To meet you, Emily said. She said anyone who sent a courthouse access log to 3 addresses simultaneously is someone she needs to know. Woman, he said. Emily looked at him with wet eyes and the crooked smile. She is, she said. She shook her head. She said, you sound like the kind of man our dad was. Our dad was the best person either of us knew. Jax held that carefully. That's a significant thing to say, he said. She's a significant person, Emily said. So I wanted you to know she said it. He stayed another hour. Emily's shoulders had fully come down, and the color had returned to her face, and she was back in the register. That was her own, not the controlled version. Thought crisis version. But the actual Emily, who thought precisely and said true things plainly and had a laugh that surprised her sometimes when it came out. He left at 11. He sat outside on the Road King for a moment before he started it. The night was cold and clear and very still, the kind of still that only happens in winter, when everything that moves has decided to stop for a while and let the quiet have its turn. About a parking lot in the rain, a dark car in the corner. Cries so faint he'd almost told himself it wasn't there. Thought about what it meant that he'd stopped. Not the heroism of it, he had no patience for that framing it made, or the way Torres had looked at him the next morning, or the way the chapter had quietly mobilized around a woman and child they'd never met. Not any of the external architecture of what had happened. Just the specific private fact of having heard a sound and chosen not to explain it away. The engine. 2 months later, 2 months on a Saturday in January, when the cold had settled in for real. Or Jax arrived at the community center parking lot to find Sophie already there. Bicycle ready. Helmet on, standing, with a patience that was unusual enough that he noted it immediately. She had something in her hand. He parked and walked over and she held it out. A blonde on me. It was a drawing. More sophisticated than an art class at the school. Emily had mentioned it, something Rosa had arranged through a next connection at the community center. The lines were cleaner, the proportions more considered. 3 figures, one tall, one medium, one small. One had something on its back that he recognized, after a moment, as a simplified version of a vest. The medium one had long hair. The small one was on a bicycle. Above them, in careful second-grade letters, my family. He looked at the drawing for a long time. Sophie watched him look at it. Is that okay? She said. The question was careful, not anxious. The precision of who understood that she was asking something significant and wanted to ask it correctly. Down to her level. That's more than okay, he said. She looked at the drawing, then at him. You're not connected by blood, she said. I know that. My teacher said family is people connected by blood. My mom said family is sometimes the person who stops on a dark road and hears your cry and chooses not to drive away. She paused. I made us a family in the drawing. Is that right? I looked at this child, this remarkable, serious, specific child who had survived things that would have diminished a lesser person and had come through them still curious, words still watchful, capable of drawing a picture on a January morning, handing it to someone and asking if the thing her heart had already decided was also true. That's exactly right, he said. She nodded with the satisfaction of someone whose internal assessment has been confirmed by external evidence. She got on the bicycle. Can we work on turns today, she said, to be able to turn without thinking about it. That takes time, he said, standing. Everything takes time, Sophie said, with the breezy certainty child repeating something she has been told so many times it has become her own wisdom. You just have to keep doing it. He positioned himself at the edge of the lot. Head, he said. She pushed off. The morning was cold, and the asphalt was dry, and the light was the particular winter light that makes everything look more real than usual, sharper, more present, not a degree of warmth to soften the edges of anything. She rode across the parking lot with her jaw set and her eyes forward, the bicycle solid under her body finding its balance with the instinct of someone who has been practicing long enough that the lesson has become reflex. End of the lot, and she leaned into the turn, not perfectly, not without effort, deeply, but with the clear, if committed intent of a child who had decided she was going to do this thing and was doing it, and she came around and rode back. She stopped in front of him and planted her feet and looked up. He said, I know, she said. No false modesty, just acknowledgement of what was true. He heard the apartment building's main door half a block away. He didn't turn to look, but he heard Emily's footsteps on the front steps. He knew the rhythm of them now, the way you know the sounds of a house you've lived in long enough. And then she appeared at the edge of the parking lot with 2 cups of coffee and the yellow dog on a leash beside her. The dog had arrived 3 weeks earlier and had been named, after extensive deliberation, Gerald, which Sophie had selected and which nobody had been able to talk her out of. Was currently very interested in a crack in the asphalt and had to be redirected twice before Emily got to the edge of the lot. She handed Jax a coffee. He took it, looked at her mother, at Jax, at Gerald, dink on a pole, and appeared to conclude that all relevant pace were present and accounted for. She pushed off and rode away again, working on the next turn. The next degree of improvement be kaput, the next thing she had decided she was going to learn. Emily stood beside Jax and watched her daughter ride. She's getting good, Emily said. She's getting very good, he said. Gerald sat down on both of their feet simultaneously, which was a thing Gerald did, apparently under the impression that 2 people standing close together constituted a single seat. Nobody pulling on his coat. Neither of them moved. They stood in the January cold with their coffee and the dog on their feet, and Sophie's wheels turning in clean arcs across the asphalt, and the morning was very still around them. Eddie pulling on his coat. And inside that stillness was everything that the last 4 months had built, not the story of a rescue, not the story of a biker and a stranger and a child in the rain, but something that had moved past story into the territory where things simply present tense, the presence, and stopped needing to be explained. Took a long sip of her coffee. Listen, without turning her head, listen, she said, you in the family drawing. Me, he said. She showed you before she showed me, Emily said. There was nothing accusatory in it, just the honest acknowledgement of the order of things. Your reaction first. She wanted to know it was safe to show me. At his coffee. And was it? Emily said. Safe? He turned and looked at her directly. Looking at him some. She had been looking at him while she spoke, and her face was open in the way it only was in moments like this, not performed, not managed. This composure she wore in rooms where she needed armor. Just Emily, present and clear-eyed and asking a real question. It was safe, he said. She held his gaze for a long moment. Boss. Then she looked back at Sophie, who had successfully navigated a turn and was raising one fist briefly in private celebration before pedaling on, apparently deciding that external acknowledgement would interrupt the momentum. Emily said. Gerald shifted his weight on their feet and sighed with the profound resignation of a dog who has accepted that humans stand still for incomprehensible periods and has decided to simply become part of the ground while they do it. Sophie came around the far end of the lot again, and this time she didn't put her foot down at all. She leaned and turned and came back, and the turn was clean. The balance certain, doing what it had spent 4 months learning to do without being asked anymore. To a stop in front of them and looked up. I got it, she said. He was already pulling on his coat. She said it, the way people say the thing they have been working toward when it finally arrives, not with the volume of surprise, is because they always knew on some level it was coming. With the quiet, weight, certainty of having arrived somewhere real. This child, this daughter of a woman who had walked into the dark to protect her. This girl who had been alone in a parked car on a highway outside a small American town and had cried in the dark because that was all she had left, and who was now standing in a cold January parking lot with her feet planted and her bicycle upright and her family around her and a yellow dog named Gerald sitting on everyone's feet. They said. Sophie looked at him, the evaluating look one last time. Then something in it shifted. The evaluation concluded. Accepted. Results answered so completely and so long ago that asking it again was simply habit, a reflex from the time before she knew. She smiled, not the careful smile of a child managing her own exposure. The one that meant she was not afraid of what she was feeling and was not planning to be. On, she said. I'm going to do it again. And she pushed off, away, because and the January light was on her back, and the wheels were turning clean and sure beneath her. Was running, and she was not running, and she was not hiding, and she was not waiting for someone to find her. Simply a child, riding a bicycle on a Saturday morning, exactly as fast as she wanted, in a direction she had chosen herself, every reason in the world to believe that when she turned around, the people she loved would still be there. They always would be, and they were. That was the whole of it, the thing that had started with a cry in the rain, on a highway no one chose to remember, that had passed through fear and flight, and 14 months of running, and one courthouse access log, and a gray sedan on County Road 7, and a bowl of Rosa's soup, and a giraffe puzzle, and a yellow dog named Gerald, all of it arriving here at this. A family that no blood had built, standing together in the cold, letting a little girl fly. The man everyone feared had become the home nobody expected. Beast, a little girl in the parked car, had done what she had been doing from the very first moment. In the dark, in the rain, had been alone and frightened, and had not given up. She had simply kept going. The right person heard her and stopped and chose to stay. And that choice made once, parking lot, in a park, in a storm, by a man on a motorcycle who had every reason to drive away and didn't, had become the foundation of everything that followed. Luck, not accident, a choice. That was all a family ever was in the end. Choice made over and over until it becomes something no one could imagine undoing.